The world hides dozens of mysteries that defy conventional explanations. They don't contradict reality, but they make us question our understanding of the past and present. Stone structures, vanished expeditions, strange sounds, light phenomena, and discoveries that don't fit into any known tradition. These stories stretch across centuries and remind us that there is always something around us that stubbornly eludes explanation. The sinking city of India. Off the coast of western India, where murky water rises above small fishing boats, local fishermen tell the same story. On clear days, when the sea recedes further than usual, straight lines seem to appear on the bottom. Too smooth, too perfect to be a simple trick of nature. People say, a drowned city sleeps down there. The water here is shallow, but always murky, thick with silt and sand. Even through it, dark silhouettes are occasionally visible. They resemble walls, stairs, or the remains of columns. Fishermen have long since become accustomed to these outlines, but outsiders are warned not to dive too deep. The sea here, they say, dislikes the curious and takes away those who try to peer too far. Old people claim that even their ancestors found strange stones in their nets, worked, smooth, with traces of carving. Sometimes they found small stone figurines, darkened by time. They were usually brought into the house and placed at the entrance as a protection. But there were also those who threw the finds back into the sea, afraid to take from the water what it considered its own. Local legends tell of a city that stood too close to the ocean and was too proud of itself. Its ruler supposedly defied the elements, building palaces right on the wave's edge. The sea endured for a long time, and then one day rose above all previous limits. People awoke in the night to the roar, and by morning half the city had disappeared beneath the waves. These stories contain no exact dates or names, only images. A moonless night, a rumble like distant thunder, and the screams of people running through flooded streets. Water that didn't recede but continued to advance, as if someone invisible were pushing it with enormous force. And then silence, in which muffled groans could be heard for a long time, as if the city continued to live beneath the sea. Over time, scientists became interested in rumors of a sinking city. They began talking about ancient settlements that may have existed along the coast long before the known kingdoms. Simple surveys began in shallow waters, examining the bottom topography, noting anomalies, and collecting artifacts. What was discovered only fueled interest, but provided no answers. Straight lines resembling streets and building foundations appeared in the seabed images taken by the instruments. Some areas looked like the remains of squares or terraces. It seemed as if there had once been something planned here, created by human hands, rather than the random movement of sand and rocks. But each new expedition to the sea encountered the same problem. The water level rose rapidly, interfering with the observations. The few divers who managed to descend deep enough described a strange sensation, as if beneath them lay not just a rocky seabed, but a dormant organism. Clear edges of blocks, man-made steps, narrow passages between the rocks. Some said they saw traces of carved patterns on the rocks, but the turbidity and lack of time prevented them from being fully visible. Another quieter story circulates among the locals. It's said that sometimes at night, when the sea is especially calm, a barely audible ringing sound rises from the depths. Not loud, not sharp, but almost a whisper. The elders call it the voices of the drowned city. They say these aren't ghosts, but the memory of a stone that hasn't come to terms with being hidden underwater. Some believe this sunken city may be one of the most ancient coastal cultures in the region. It may have existed long before many known kingdoms. Its destruction then could have been the result of a great flood, described in ancient myths as a punishing deluge. But for now, these are mere conjectures based on fragments of artifacts and vague outlines on the seabed. Other researchers take a more cautious approach to this mystery. They say water and silt can deceive the eye. What appears to be a wall may simply be a cluster of rocks and sand arranged in a regular pattern. The human brain likes to see familiar shapes where none exist. But even skeptics admit that the strange regularity of the lines and blocks demands closer examination. The problem is that the sea here is changing. The shore is eroding, the silt is rising, the currents are getting stronger. With each passing year, it becomes increasingly difficult to see the bottom. It feels as if the ocean itself is covering its tracks, concealing what was recently visible, as if it has a will of its own, revealing a little, then taking it away, preventing the formation of a complete picture. And so the mystery of the sinking city off the coast of India remains somewhere on the border between reality and legend. There are stones with traces of workmanship, there are straight lines, there are legends and fragmentary data. But there is no clear answer as to what exactly was here before the sea claimed it. Perhaps one day, technology will allow us to see the entire seabed as clearly as dry land. For now, this city lives on in the depths, in the stories of fishermen, and in the hazy light of murky waves. Atacama Caravan. In the driest desert in the world, where sand lies in layers like the ashes of an ancient fire, there's a story of a caravan that vanished without a trace. Locals say a group of traders once set out along an ancient route between the hills, but never reached their final settlement. Neither people, nor animals, nor cargo. Nothing was ever found. The Atacama Desert appears motionless, but in reality, it has a harsh life of its own. There are sharp gusts of wind that instantly lift sand into the air. But even such storms usually leave traces: hoofprints, scraps of fabric, scattered objects. In the case of the missing caravan, nothing was found. The sand lay flat, as if no one had ever passed through. They say the first searchers arrived at the extinction zone a few days after the caravan had failed to arrive. They expected to find at least ruined camps or traces of a campsite, but instead they found absolute emptiness. Not a single footprint, not a single scratch on the ground. The layer of sand looked untouched, as if the desert itself had closed its doors behind it. There's a theory among the elders that the caravan may have strayed from its route, following mirages. The Atacama is known for its illusions, where glittering spots resembling water appear in the hot air. The traders could have believed they were seeing an oasis and wandered off. But even so, searchers should have found tracks. Their absence remains the strangest thing. The second theory is underground sinkholes. In some parts of the desert, there are indeed areas where the ground suddenly collapses, forming deep craters. If a caravan had found itself in such an area, people and animals could have fallen into a soft layer of sand. However, such sinkholes are usually noticeable by their edges or characteristic crumbling. Here, the surface was smooth, as if someone had carefully leveled it. There are also rumors of a strange hum that travelers in these parts sometimes hear. It resembles a distant roar or vibration underground. This sound is inconstant. It can appear suddenly and disappear just as quickly. Some believe the caravan may have entered a zone of weak underground vibrations. Perhaps a shift in the sand caused a subsurface shift, sucking in everything above ground. One of the most terrifying stories involves a discovery made many years after the disappearance. A shepherd discovered a fragment of a stone bead in a remote area. It was unusually smooth and had a distinctive pattern similar to those used by caravanners, but nothing else was found nearby. Some took this as proof that part of the caravan hadn't disappeared immediately, but had wandered for some time. Those who live near old caravan routes speak of a place where the sand moves more quietly than usual. The wind seems to die down there, and the air becomes thicker. People swear they can hear muffled footsteps there. Sometimes they hear something like the clinking of dishes or quiet voices. They believe this is the echo of a caravan that never found its way off its final trail. However, more cautious researchers believe the caravan story is a mixture of a real disappearance and centuries-old retellings. In the Atacama Desert, there were indeed numerous cases of people losing their way and dying of thirst, but their remains were usually found. The complete disappearance of an entire group remains a rare exception, one that no one can explain. There's another oddity. All the stories emphasize that the caravan disappeared not in the middle of the desert, but in a relatively safe, well-known, and well-explored area. This is a route that traders have used for centuries, and no particular dangers have been reported along this stretch. This makes the story even more puzzling. Some geologists speculated about subsurface voids that could have formed from ancient salt deposits. If such a void had collapsed under the weight of the animals and their cargo, the entire caravan could have been instantly submerged. But that would have left behind craters or cracks. None were found. To this day, travelers sometimes leave small stone pyramids at that site as a sign of respect for those who disappeared into the sands. They say it was no accident that the desert claimed the caravan, that sometimes the Atacama chooses its victims. This idea sounds like a legend, but in local culture it is passed down very seriously. Ultimately, the mystery of the caravan's disappearance remains unanswered. No bones, no traces, no wreckage. Only the desert, silent, as if concealing something greater than just a tragedy. And the people who are still afraid to camp there overnight, fearing that the sand that once swallowed the entire group might awaken again. Circles of Namibia. Scattered throughout the Namib Desert, where the ground is heated to the point of stone, are thousands of perfectly circular vegetation-free areas. They appear to have been scorched or carved with incredible precision. Their sizes vary, but their shapes are nearly perfect. Local tribes call these places spirit trails, emphasizing that the circle's origins remain as much a mystery to them as they are to researchers. Viewed from above, the circles form patterns resembling a carefully planned structure. Some are arranged in neat rows, others haphazardly, but a strange logic is felt throughout. The grass around the circles grows normally, dense and stable, but within them there is only dry earth. And not just dry, it seems denser than in other places, as if it had been compacted with something heavy. Generations of Namibians have passed down stories of nights when the earth breathes. They claim to sometimes see barely perceptible pulsations in the soil, as if something were slowly moving beneath it. Perhaps this is due to temperature fluctuations or subsidence, but legends speak of invisible creatures that burned circular footprints as they emerged from the depths. Some researchers suggested that the circles might be the work of termites. These insects are indeed capable of altering the soil structure and destroying plant roots. However, when studying many circles, no traces of termite nests were found. In others, conversely, too few traces were found to explain the scale of the phenomenon. Most importantly, the circles maintain their shape for years, despite wind and seasonal changes. Another theory is that the circles are related to moisture distribution. In the desert, every drop of water is precious, and plants sometimes form patterns that optimally capture moisture. But why these patterns take on a perfectly circular shape, and why such circles appear over such a vast area, remains a mystery. Even the simplest circles look too neat. The people who live among these landscapes consider them sacred. Some tribes forbid camping near the circles, fearing disturbing their peace. They say that quiet rustling sounds are heard near the circles at night, even though the desert is usually completely silent. Travelers who have spent the night in these places often report a strange feeling, as if someone is watching. At the beginning of the last century, cartographers first noticed the circles. They were surprised not only by their shapes, but also by the fact that the circles were uniformly smooth across areas with varying topography. It was as if something were creating them, oblivious to slope or rocks. This led many to believe that the circles might be traces of ancient processes that had existed here in distant eras. One of the most interesting features is that the circles appear, disappear, and sometimes reappear in the same places. These are not static formations. Some seem to have their own life cycle. At first, the circle is dim, then expands, then gradually collapses and disappears. But a new one may appear nearby, just as smooth and mysterious. At one site, researchers discovered circles just a few meters in diameter, while nearby they found enormous ones stretching tens of meters. Such a variety of sizes makes it difficult to find a single cause. If this is a natural phenomenon, then why is there no pattern? If biological, why are the formation mechanisms so varied? And if cultural or artificial, then who could have created them in such large numbers? Locals tell a story about long shadows that would descend from the hills at night. People would see them from afar. Their movements were slow and smooth, as if gliding along the ground. And in the morning, new circles would appear where the shadows had flitted. Elderly people are certain that these aren't spirits in the mystical sense, but something people simply don't know about. Perhaps an animal that hasn't been seen in a long time. Modern research has added even more questions. In the images, the soil inside the circles sometimes reflects light differently than the surrounding soil. This means the structure of the soil there has truly been altered. But by what? Pressure? Temperature? Chemical influences? No one has yet provided a definitive answer. Each new expedition has yielded data that doesn't fit with previous theories. At night, the soil in some circles is slightly warmer than the surrounding area. The difference is small but consistent. This could indicate processes occurring in the ground that aren't visible on the surface. Perhaps gas emissions. Perhaps ancient voids heated by something deep underground. Or perhaps it's simply a natural phenomenon that hasn't yet been studied. But the most mysterious thing is the sensation people experience when standing in the center of the circle. Many say the air around them becomes denser. Some describe a slight pressure in their chest or temples. It's not dangerous, doesn't cause pain, but it's distinctly felt, and no one has yet figured out what exactly causes this effect. Perhaps it's a trick of perception, but it's all too common. The Namibian circles remain one of the strangest natural mysteries on Earth. They don't resemble ordinary geological formations. They have no consistent, logical cause. Yet they continue to appear, disappear, and change shape, as if following their own rhythm. And those who live nearby are convinced that the circles are part of the desert, revealed only to those who look closely. The roar of the Rocky Mountains. In the remote reaches of the Rocky Mountains, where the forest thickens and the slopes conceal narrow gorges, travelers report a strange, low hum. It doesn't sound like wind, doesn't resemble the sound of rivers, and isn't associated with animals. The hum appears unexpectedly, as if emanating from within the mountain itself. It's soft but persistent, sometimes lasting for minutes, sometimes just a brief moment. Those who have heard this sound describe it as a vibration passing through both the air and the ground simultaneously, as if the mountains were emitting a quiet groan or a heavy sigh. Some claim the rumble can even be heard through shoes. A slight tremor in the ground can be felt. However, instruments placed in several locations did not detect any earthquakes or tremors at these moments. The first mention of a strange sound comes from the tales of hunters who roamed these territories for centuries. They said that sometimes at night the forest seemed to come alive, not a rustling or murmuring, but a humming. The sound was even, deep, and unwavering, and it always appeared suddenly, breaking the complete silence of the mountain slopes. Then it disappeared, leaving a feeling as if something important had been left unsaid. Some residents believe the hum is caused by air movement in narrow natural passages. However, such passages typically produce whistling or sharp noises, not low vibrations. Moreover, the hum is often heard even in completely windless weather. In this case, the source could be underground voids where the air resonates. However, no such voids were found in the areas where the hum was heard. One theory is that this phenomenon is related to temperature fluctuations. Mountains cool significantly at night and heat up during the day, and their rocks can produce sounds as they expand and contract. However, such sounds are usually brief and resemble crackling rather than a uniform vibration. A rumble, on the other hand, lasts a long time, and its timbre remains constant. This makes the explanation incomplete. Travelers who spent the night in those places reported strange sensations. When the rumble began, the air seemed to become heavier. Tree branches swayed slightly, even though there was no wind. Some claimed to feel a faint metallic taste in their mouths, as if a thunderstorm were approaching. But there was no rain or lightning on such nights. Local tribes tell a story about breathing stones. They believed that the mountains were living beings that sometimes reminded people of their presence. In these stories, the rumble was perceived not as a threat, but as a warning. Do not venture too deep into the gorges, and do not disturb the places where the stone sleeps. Many still treat these places with respect and caution. In the 20th century, several researchers attempted to record hum with equipment, but they only managed to capture a barely perceptible frequency fluctuation, difficult to distinguish from the background noise of nature. The sound seemed audible to the human ear, but the instruments detected it too weakly. This led to the idea that hum might be a combination of natural noises that merge into a single whole only under certain conditions. One day, a group of tourists claimed to have heard a humming sound for almost a quarter of an hour. The sound, they said, was so intense that it was felt by the body. They described it as a vibration, similar to the sound of a distant engine. However, there were no roads or vehicles nearby. When the hum disappeared, the forest was once again filled with normal sounds, the chirping of insects and the light rustling of leaves. There's an even stranger detail. Some claim the hum evokes a feeling of unease, not panic, but an inner tension, as if something is about to happen. This feeling disappears as suddenly as the sound itself. It's unclear whether this is due to the acoustic impact or a psychological effect, but many describe it in the same way. Skeptics, however, believe the hum is the result of a complex combination of natural factors: wind, temperature fluctuations, microseismic processes, and terrain. They believe that at certain points, the sound intensifies and transforms into a low-pitched vibration. However, even they admit that the hum is too consistent in sound to be entirely random. The story of the humming slopes of the Rocky Mountains remains one of those mysteries where the line between logic and the inexplicable is too fine. There's a sound that people hear. There's a lack of convincing data that could explain it. So, everyone who's heard this hum leaves with the feeling that the mountains are trying to tell them something important. And to this day, no one knows what it is. Black Walls of Mauritania. In the dry, rocky wastelands of Mauritania, where the wind has sculpted the rocks for years, dark walls lie strikingly visible. They look less like natural cliffs than fragments of ancient structures. The stones are smooth, as if polished, and arranged in neat rows, leading many to suspect man-made origins. But in the desert, there are no traces of settlements, roads, or cultures that could have built such structures. The first impression of the walls is their unusual color. The stone is so dark that it appears jet black. In the sun, they glisten, as if coated with a thin layer of glass. Some researchers have suggested this is the result of prolonged exposure to wind, heating, and cooling. However, other areas of the desert, subjected to the same processes, appear completely different. Only these walls possess such a deep hue and smoothness. As you approach the walls, you can notice thin parallel lines. They don't look like cracks or create a pattern of destruction. Rather, they resemble marks of work with something hard, as if the stone had been cut or polished. These lines run evenly, at the same level, and are sometimes repeated on adjacent blocks. It's difficult to explain them as random, but there's no evidence of human intervention either. Locals say the walls slide. This legend sounds strange, but they say the stones themselves change their slope over time, although they remain monolithic. People claim that over decades, the walls slowly lean to one side. Scientists attribute this to soil movement due to heat, but no one has conducted any precise observations. The mystery remains unsolved. Interestingly, there is no vegetation near the black walls. Even the rare desert shrubs that can survive almost anywhere don't grow here. The surrounding soil feels harder than usual, and the surface temperature resembles hot metal. Perhaps this is a coincidence. Perhaps the reason lies in the chemical composition of the rocks. But questions about the nature of this area remain elusive. One of the strangest features is its unusual acoustics. If you stand facing the wall and speak a word, the sound returns as a quiet echo, audible only to those standing nearby. A person standing off to the side will not hear the echo. This localized sound reflection appears to be the result of the surface's precise geometry. But how it arose in the wilderness remains unclear. Some travelers have reported nights when the walls seem to emit a slight hum, not distinct enough to record, but clear enough to feel a vibration beneath their feet. These stories are always cautious. People aren't sure whether it's just a trick of the wind or their own perception. But such references are common, and it makes one wonder. Ancient nomadic legends describe the walls as the remains of a city consumed by the sun. This figurative expression evokes the idea of an ancient settlement lost to heat and time. They believed that people once lived here, building houses from dark stone quarried from the depths of the desert. But intense heat and sandy winds forced the inhabitants to abandon the city, leaving only the walls, undeterred by sand and time. In some areas, you can see lines resembling block boundaries. But if you try to run your finger along the joints, you feel only a smooth surface. The stone has no seams, as if the wall were a single, monolithic slab. This surprises even geologists, as ordinary rocks form cracks and fissures. Here, however, the surface is perfect, as if it had been processed. It's believed that the black walls are the remains of an ancient eruption. Molten rock supposedly cooled, forming smooth, even vertical surfaces. However, such an effect requires a specific combination of conditions, and such a shape is not found in other volcanic areas. Furthermore, there are no characteristic traces of lava flows or solidified strata nearby. Some researchers believe the walls may have formed as a result of ancient tectonic processes when the Earth's crust cracked and rose, creating smooth faults. But if so, these formations would have to be part of a larger structure. Here, however, the walls are found in fragments, sometimes long sections, sometimes short, like individual elements of some structure. Locals also report a strange phenomenon. Compasses near the walls show slight deviations. Not sharp, not catastrophic, but deviations of a few degrees. Scientists suspected that the stone might contain elevated metal content. However, analyses conducted on small samples revealed a normal composition. Perhaps the stone is heterogeneous, or the metal levels depend on depth, not surface. Some have seen marks on the walls that resemble indentations or depressions, but they're so worn away by time that their origin is impossible to determine. These could be natural pockets or man-made marks created by someone in a distant era. One researcher reported noticing a grid-like pattern, but couldn't find it on repeated inspections. Sand could have obscured part of the surface, or it could have been a trick of the light. In the evenings, the shadows of the walls lengthen, creating the feeling that before you are not simple stone cliffs, but the remains of a fortress. Even those inclined to skepticism admit these walls evoke a strange feeling, not fear, but rather respect and incomprehension, as if you are standing before something ancient and important, something that has survived many eras and still preserves its history. Scientists planned deeper exploration, but the harsh conditions, high temperatures, and lack of water made these plans extremely challenging. Equipment quickly breaks down, and reaching the walls is difficult. Therefore, most of the information about them comes from travelers' accounts and isolated observations by researchers who have managed to reach the site. Thus, the Black Walls of Mauritania remain one of the most unusual features of the desert. They combine the hallmarks of a natural formation with those of an ancient structure. Their surface is too smooth, their lines too straight, their sound reflection too precise for this to be a mere coincidence. But so far, there is no evidence of an ancient civilization or a convincing explanation for their geological origin. And so the walls continue to stand amid the sands, dark and silent, like guardians of a forgotten secret. People pass by, study them, marvel, but still cannot understand what exactly created these monoliths. Perhaps one day, desert exploration will become easier, and answers will emerge. For now, the black walls remain a mystery, patiently awaiting their time, as calmly as they did several thousand years ago. Cape Sable Expedition. At the rugged Cape Sable, where waves crash against the rocky shores with a force capable of breaking boats, a small expedition vanished many years ago. It was a group of explorers who had set out to study rare coastal formations and the strange noises local fishermen heard at night. The group consisted of experienced men, well versed in the sea and its dangers. But their journey ended as suddenly as it began. The expedition set out in the morning when the sea seemed calm. For several hours, everything proceeded as expected. The boats moved along the shore, recording changes in the terrain and taking photographs. The group was last seen near a narrow bay, rarely visited even by fishermen. After that, no one saw any boats or people. That evening, when the team failed to return, the organizers raised the alarm. The search began the very next morning. In such places, every hour counts. The current quickly carries away any traces, and fog can obscure an entire ship. Rescuers surveyed the coastlines, inspected coves and protruding rocks, but found not a single piece of wreckage. The expedition's boats seemed to have vanished. This fact became the first huge question. Even in a disaster, the sea almost always washes up at least some of the equipment. Cape Sable is known for its character. It's a place where weather conditions change instantly. One moment, a calm surface, the next, dark waves rising out of nowhere. However, on the day of the disappearance, there were no unusual storms. Fishermen nearby reported that the sea remained calm. Therefore, the theory of a sudden storm seemed unlikely. When searchers explored the bay where the expedition was last seen, they discovered strange footprints in the sand. Not human footprints, but deep streaks, as if something heavy had been dragged along the beach. These lines extended from the water toward the cliffs and disappeared at their base. But no ropes, objects, or boats were found. The sand looked as if it had been shifted into a large, flat surface. What they were, no one knew. Some believe the expedition attempted to disembark to explore the caves at the foot of the cliffs. These caves have rarely been explored. The entrances are narrow, and the nearby water is cold and unpredictable. But if the explorers had approached too close, the boats could have collided with hidden rock ridges. However, in that case, debris or evidence of a collision would have been left on the surface. Nothing of the sort was found. There are stories of strange sounds heard around the cape. They were long, low beeps, like the distant echo of a huge bell. The sound came sometimes from the water, sometimes from the rocks. Some explorers wanted to determine its nature. Perhaps it was the result of resonance of waves striking voids underwater. But the expedition vanished without identifying the source of these sounds. A few weeks later, the search team discovered a small metal object in one of the bays. It was so heavily coated with salt that it was initially mistaken for a stone. It turned out to be part of the expedition's gear, but most importantly, the object was bent at an odd angle, as if compressed by incredible pressure. Such a deformation is difficult to explain by normal maritime conditions. A theory emerged about an underwater landslide. Sometimes areas form on the seabed that suddenly collapse. If the boats were over such a spot, they could have been suddenly pulled down. But then there should have been signs of activity, murky water, traces of emissions, changes in the terrain. Nothing of the sort was observed during the search. The seabed appeared calm. Some researchers have put forward a cautious hypothesis about powerful underwater vortices. Such phenomena are rare, but they can instantly suck objects underwater. However, this theory also has its drawbacks. The vortex leaves traces of bubbles, foaming, or at least a changed surface structure. People who were there that day saw nothing unusual. A long-standing legend among local fishermen speaks of singing crevices near the cape itself. They claim that deep vertical cracks exist underwater, capable of drawing in water with tremendous force. In rare cases, they say, the crevices open and create a funnel invisible from the surface. It sounds almost like a legend, but fishermen take these tales very seriously and avoid certain areas. Another mysterious discovery was made several months later. A plank, similar in size to part of the expedition's boat, was discovered on a remote beach. It was scorched on one side. Wildfires are rare in this area, and the plank had been in the water for quite some time. What could have scorched it? No one knows. There was no lightning or evidence of a collision. Despite all efforts, no bodies, boats, or large pieces of debris were ever found. For experienced researchers, such a complete disappearance seemed impossible. Even large ships in distress leave traces. Here, there was emptiness. This led to the idea that the disappearance occurred not on the surface, but deeper, in places difficult to reach and rarely illuminated by light. In the following years, there were occasional reports of strange lights in the area of the cape. Fishermen saw faint bluish flashes underwater near the rocks. They lasted a second, sometimes less. No one could determine their nature. They could have been natural light, a gas vent, or a reflection of moonlight. But oddly, such lights began to be noticed only after the expedition's disappearance. Cape Sable remains a place where harsh nature, an unpredictable sea, and ancient stories converge. The expedition's disappearance became part of these stories, as if the sea itself had decided to shroud their fate in mystery. And although a thorough search was conducted, no one has ever discovered what happened on that quiet day when the group vanished between two rocky ledges. Today, people passing by the cape sometimes stop to listen to the low hum that comes and goes. They don't know what causes it, and they're unsure whether the members of the vanished expedition heard it before they disappeared. But one thing remains constant. Cape Sable holds its secret, and it's clearly in no hurry to reveal it. Corridors of the Andes. High in the Andes, among the rocks, where the air is thin and the cold chills the bones, lies a network of underground corridors, the origin of which has been debated for decades. They are not marked on old maps, nor are they associated with any known culture of the region. But travelers and shepherds have long known about them, narrow passages leading deep into the mountain as if forgotten. And each of these corridors bears traces that are difficult to explain. The first thing that strikes you is the evenness of the walls. They're not perfect, but they're too regular for natural cracks. The surface appears to have been worked with something hard, leaving streaks of equal length. These aren't pick marks or animal scratches. The lines run parallel, in even rows, as if some unknown tool had once grazed the stone. But no known Andean culture left behind such patterns. It's always cool inside the corridors. Even in summer, when the sun heats the rocks outside, the air inside remains almost icy. It feels as if the mountains are absorbing the heat and not releasing it. People who have descended deeper have reported that the further you go, the stronger the air pressure. It becomes denser, as if, at least slightly, pressing on your skin. This creates a strange feeling of confinement, even though the corridor is quite wide. One of the oldest stories dates back to the time when shepherds first began to notice that some of their animals were disappearing without a trace. They would go off to graze near the entrances to the corridors and never return. The shepherds found a tuft of wool in one of the passages, as if someone had dragged the animal inside, but there was no trace of blood or signs of a struggle. It was as if the animal had simply vanished into the darkness. Inside some of the deeper halls, smooth, round depressions are found in the floor. They're not particularly deep, but they're remarkably regular in shape. It's hard to imagine such depressions forming naturally. They look like bowls carved into stone. People debate whether they could have been ancient gathering places, water reservoirs, or simply traces of some ancient ritual. But why such depressions aren't found in other places in this exact shape remains a question. There's another strange detail. Traces of a black coating have been discovered on the walls of several corridors. It doesn't resemble mold, doesn't alter the structure of the stone, and is almost odorless. It's impossible to scrape off completely. Even if the top layer is removed, another layer remains underneath. Scientists speculate that these are traces of ancient smoke or soot. But why it was so well preserved and why it only appeared in certain rooms remains unknown. Some researchers attempted to measure sound in the corridors. They said the acoustics inside resembled a resonant tunnel. If you clap your hands, the sound travels slowly, layered, as if reflecting off multiple invisible barriers. In one of the halls, they observed a phenomenon where even a quiet whisper produced a soft echo, which repeated several times, even though the room was small. There's a legend among Andeans that many centuries ago, people fled to the mountains seeking protection from storms. They believed the mountains could accept a person if they cleared their path. Some claimed that these corridors were the work of those seeking shelter from the elements. But then the question arises. Why do the corridors extend so deep, sometimes diverging tens of meters underground, as if forming an entire underground city? Travelers exploring the corridors report strange sounds. Sometimes it's a soft rustling, sometimes a muffled thud, as if stone were falling on stone somewhere deep. But when the explorer arrives at the spot where the sound was heard, there's nothing there. It would seem that these could have been small avalanches, but no one has ever found any traces of fresh stones. In one of the deepest passages, a trace resembling a footprint was discovered. Not human, not animal. It was oblong with 3 deep indentations. The surrounding stone appeared slightly indented, as if someone had stepped on it with great force. But this was the only trace. Nothing similar was found nearby or further away. Perhaps it was a natural depression, or perhaps something else entirely. Several researchers who studied the corridors in the mid-20th century claimed that the air seemed to vibrate at depth. The sensation was similar to an approaching earthquake, a slight tremor underfoot and in the air itself. However, no instrument recorded any earthquakes. One of the researchers described the sensation as the breath of the mountain, which, while figurative, accurately conveys the impression. There's a legend about a low voice sometimes heard by those who venture too deep. People say that in one of the farthest chambers, a sound like a slow hum can be heard. It doesn't sound like wind because there's no wind inside the corridors, and it doesn't sound like water. There are no streams there either. The tribes believed it was the mountain's voice, a warning that they shouldn't go any further. In some areas, the ceilings appear to have once been supported by wooden beams that have long since rotted. But the marks are too even. Parallel grooves run at the same level, giving the impression that the ceiling was reinforced by man. If this were true, the beams should have left traces of wood. But nothing of the sort was found. Only stone, perfectly matching the shape of the grooves. The most intriguing thing is the intersections. The corridors don't all follow a single direction. They intertwine, forming crossroads, as if they were truly part of a vast network. But there's not a single clue as to who could have built all this. No inscriptions, no tools, no pottery. A void that feels logical, but devoid of history. Some corridors lead to cliffs within the mountain. After walking dozens of meters, one finds oneself at the edge, where the ground suddenly disappears, and beneath lies darkness, sweeping down to an unknown depth. Such cliffs appear dangerous, but they create the feeling that this place was unfinished, or once had a different purpose. Despite decades of research, the Andean corridors remain a mystery. Too straight to be natural, too ancient to be easily explained, and too deep to be considered mere minds. Their origin remains a debate between geology, history, and legend. And those who have ventured deepest say one thing: the corridors seem to breathe, not literally, but perceptibly. as if you're inside something enormous, something alive, looking at you silently and without judgment. And if you listen carefully, you can hear time moving deep within the mountains, leaving traces no one has yet been able to decipher. Masks of the Levant. In the rocky lands of the Levant, where ancient trails stretch between hills and dry riverbeds, strange stone masks are found. They appear over decades, one after another, usually deep beneath a layer of soil. The masks are heavy, angular, with a crude, almost inhuman expression. They are dated to very ancient times, but there is no precise date. Scientists cautiously estimate gaps of several millennia. At first glance, the masks appear simple: 2 eye holes, a primitive nose, and the faintest hint of a mouth. But upon closer inspection, their odd proportions become apparent. The eye sockets are always excessively large and round. The noses are flat, as if carved with a single stroke. And the lower part of the face is sometimes slightly elongated, creating the impression that the depicted creature is not quite human. Most of the masks are carved from stone, which is difficult to work by hand. But marks on their surfaces indicate that their creators used techniques very different from simple chipping and flakes. In some places, the surface appears polished. In others, it appears deeply gouged. The tools the artisans used remain a mystery, as the pattern of cutting differs from the usual marks left by ancient tools. Locals say that masks don't like light. It sounds figurative, but they explain it this way. Items found and exposed to the sun seem to lose their cool hue. The stone becomes warmer, changing color slightly. Elders believe it's best to store masks in the shade, otherwise they might wake up. Not literally, of course. To wake up means to remember what you're supposed to protect. There's a legend about a people who lived on these hills long before large settlements emerged. They say they created masks to hide the faces of the dead from the sky, not from spirits or animals, but from the sky itself, as if the firmament could take away what belonged to a person. The masks were placed on the faces of the deceased, but they weren't buried with them. They were later removed and reused. Therefore, no mask resembles a specific person. Scientists note another detail. Many masks have holes along the edges, as if for fastenings. These could have been ropes or leather straps. But then the question arises, were these masks worn or hung? If so, why? Some researchers believe they were amulets meant to be hidden in secluded places. But then why were the masks found underground, horizontally, and not on vertical walls? One of the finds included a mask with a thin line cut into the forehead. The line is neat and smooth, as if the surface had been cut with something very sharp. No one has been able to explain its purpose. Some believe it's a symbol, others believe it's a crack, strangely preserved. But the surrounding stone is completely intact, and the cut is strictly geometric, making it too deliberate to be accidental. Some researchers have noted that masks are often found near sites where quarries once stood. However, the masks themselves were not made from the same type of stone mined in those areas. This means the material was transported from other areas. But how far? And why was this particular stone used? Its structure is dense and uniform, but unremarkable. The most mystical part of the legends revolves around sound. People say that if you place the mask on the ground and tap it with your fingers, the sound is dull and warm, as if the stone is denser on the inside than on the outside. Some even claim the mask vibrates slightly in their hands. Of course, this could be a subjective sensation or a characteristic of the rock itself, but such stories are repeated too often. Sometimes masks are found with traces of red pigment. It's almost completely erased, but visible from a certain angle. It's difficult to say whether this was a ritual design or simply traces of ancient soil. However, folktales mention that masks were fed with earth. People sprinkled them with red clay to awaken the memory of the stone. What memory and what it was intended to preserve, no one knows. There's another surprising fact. The masks often lie alone, not together, not next to each other, but rather as if carefully placed in the ground, just as someone left them. But the layer of soil above them is thick, and the masks themselves look as if they've been lying there for centuries. How they ended up in these particular locations is unknown. No ruined buildings, burials, or traces of ritual sites were found nearby. One expedition discovered a mask with a small dent on the side. The dent was perfectly shaped, as if struck by a round object. However, the stone at this point hadn't cracked, merely flexed, which is completely uncharacteristic of its structure. Scientists debated this for a long time, but were unable to find an explanation. Either the impact was incredibly powerful, or the stone possessed some unusual properties. People who have held the masks describe the same sensation, as if the stone were absorbing heat. It became slightly cooler than their palm, despite the surrounding temperature. This happens with dense rocks, but here the effect seems more pronounced. This impression leads many to believe that the masks were created not simply for decoration or ritual, but for some deeper purpose. Interestingly, not a single mask shows any signs of obvious personalization. There are no decorations, no details indicating status or tribal affiliation. They all seem uniform. This leads researchers to speculate that the masks may have symbolized not specific individuals, but rather a state of being, fear, protection, the transition between life and death, communication with the spirits of the land, or even an attempt to conceal something from those who lived nearby. But the biggest mystery lies elsewhere. Why create dozens of heavy stone masks if they weren't treasured, used as barter, or left in tombs? What was the purpose of such effort, and why are masks still being found centuries later? Levantine masks remain among the most inexplicable archaeological finds in the region. They combine simplicity of form with strange craftsmanship. Their origin is shrouded in the mists of antiquity, and their purpose remains a matter of conjecture. But one thing is clear. Whoever created these masks imbued them with a meaning we are still unable to decipher. And each mask discovered only adds to the mystery, which time is in no hurry to unravel. Echo of Antarctica. In the remote icy expanses of Antarctica, where the wind cuts through your skin and the silence seems alive, researchers have heard sounds that still haven't been clearly explained. These sounds are called ice echoes. They aren't the cracking of ice, the roar of wind, or the shifting of snow. The echo sounds as if somewhere deep beneath your feet, in the depths of the ice layers, something is slowly and steadily moving. The first mentions of this phenomenon came from participants in early expeditions. Those setting foot on the Antarctic ice for the first time reported hearing low, slightly vibrating thumps beneath their feet. It sounded like something enormous was pounding on a rock or metal. At the time, this was attributed to ice shifts, but the sounds were too rhythmic. They were repeated, sometimes several times, as if transmitting some kind of signal. Modern researchers describe this echo as something between a distant hum and a muffled ringing. It doesn't travel through the air. It's felt by the body. Some feel a vibration in their feet, others in their chest. It resembles an internal response, as if the sound were passing through a person. And if you listen closely, it seems to come from somewhere below, from depths that humanity still knows little about. Antarctica is more than just a continent of ice. Hidden beneath its thick ice cover are mountain ranges, valleys, and vast lakes, some of which have been isolated from the surface for tens of thousands of years. Deep within the ice, the temperature is stable, the pressure is enormous, and the silence is almost absolute. That's why any deviation from familiar sounds is alarming. The echo beneath the ice is unlike anything known. At one of the research camps, people described nights when echoes would begin to repeat at regular intervals. The wind was calm, instruments recorded normal temperatures, and no ice movement, but every few minutes, a deep, dull sound would be heard. It was so consistent that the expedition members concluded it must be a mechanical process occurring somewhere below. But what could be at work beneath kilometers of ice? Some scientists have attempted to explain the phenomenon by the movement of subglacial rivers. Antarctica does indeed have subsurface water systems that periodically reverse direction and refill. However, such processes are too slow to produce repeated impacts. Moreover, the nature of the sound, more metallic or stony, is inconsistent with the movement of water. There's also a theory about giant ice slabs that can shift under their own weight, creating impacts. However, this happens rarely and is usually accompanied by major changes in the ice structure. Expeditions that heard the echoes didn't record such changes. Furthermore, ice cracks sound different, high and crunchy, not low and booming. Some researchers have turned their attention to subglacial mountains. Hidden beneath the ice sheet is an ancient crustal structure that can produce sounds during microseismic movements. But the recurrence of the impacts and their unusual frequency don't fit conventional patterns. There's too much uniformity, too much rhythm. Interestingly, the echo isn't always heard. Sometimes it's silent for months. Other times it appears in several areas at once. Participants in various expeditions have reported that the sound seems to roll under the ice. It appears in one place, then a day later in another, hundreds of kilometers away. It resembles the movement of a wave, as if something is actually moving underground. In one case, the sound was accompanied by a faint vibration of the surface. It was barely noticeable, but could be felt by placing your palms on the ice. People described it as a heartbeat, slow and steady. The instruments detected almost nothing, small fluctuations that could have been caused by anything. But the synchronicity of the vibration with the sound alerted the researchers. Some expedition participants admitted that such sounds cause intense psychological tension. Antarctica is a difficult place in itself. Endless emptiness, cold, silence, the absence of familiar landmarks. When this is compounded by the feeling that something unknown is happening deep beneath the ice, even the most resilient people feel uneasy, because the echo doesn't sound like natural noise. It has a strange order to it. Among local legends, and polar explorers have their own, there's a story about ice organs. These are the names given to areas where wind or underground processes create unusual sounds, reminiscent of low musical tones. But the echoes the researchers describe don't sound like music. They resemble a call, a knock, a rhythmic signal that no one can decipher. Some evidence suggests the sound may be related to subglacial lakes, which are slowly changing due to pressure. If an ice slab buckles over a lake, it can produce deep, resonant thumps. But why do these thumps sometimes repeat evenly? Why are they clearly audible in some places, but not in others? And why does the sound often occur on completely calm days? An attempt was made to install special sensors across a large patch of ice to capture the echo structure. The devices worked reliably for several weeks, but recorded only rare, weak vibrations. At a moment when the people were hundreds of kilometers from the camp, the echo reappeared, clear, distinct, and low. It lasted for almost 10 minutes, but the sensors recorded nothing. It was as if only the person could hear the sound. This led to the idea that the echo might be an acoustic illusion caused by a combination of temperature, air density, and psychological state. But then why did dozens of people hear it at different times, on different expeditions, in different locations? And why were the descriptions so similar? There are stories of the sound sometimes being accompanied by a strange sensation, as if the ground beneath the ice were alive. Not in a mystical sense, but in the sense of movement that's invisible. People described it as footsteps or a pulsation deep within. This impression lingered even after the sound ceased. The most mysterious thing about the Antarctic echo is its origin. Scientists refer to it simply as subglacial acoustic anomalies. But no theory, natural, geological, or atmospheric, fully explains the phenomenon. There are too many inconsistencies, too many questions, and so the echo remains part of the Antarctic silence, a part in which a sound suddenly appears, reminding us that beneath the kilometers of ice there is a world about which people know too little, a world where processes take place, hidden from view, yet still audible. And every beat, every rumble, is like a step towards something that has yet to be understood. Hunden Bell. In the mountains of Hunden, amidst humid forests and rocky outcrops, stands an old pagoda, long abandoned. In its center hangs a huge bell, which the locals call the Silent One. It truly doesn't ring, at least not when struck. The metal is dull, as if there's no void inside. But at night, residents of nearby villages hear its vibrations. Not a ringing or a thump, but a soft, low hum, like breathing. The first mention of a bell appears in ancient chronicles, which speak of a vessel for the voice of the ancestors. According to legend, the bell was created by craftsmen who worked metal in a special way, using ore found in a deep crevice at the foot of the mountain. The ore was said to be black, heavy, and produced a soft sound when dropped onto a stone. But no one knows exactly what metal they were talking about. The bell is impressive in its size, several meters high and wide, so heavy that even a large force of people would be unable to move it. But what's even more astonishing is the structure of the metal. The bell's surface isn't smooth like that of ordinary objects. It features fine, wavy lines running around its circumference. It seems as if the metal had flowed like a liquid and then solidified, preserving its fluidity. Scientists who have studied the surface acknowledge that such marks are not left by ordinary casting molds. During the day, the bell is indeed silent. Striking it produces only a faint, resonanceless thud. This surprises experts. A hollow metal object of such size should produce a powerful sound. But here, there's only a dull heaviness. And yet, every villager will tell you that at night, the bell comes alive. The first accounts of nocturnal sounds date back several centuries. People claimed that at certain hours, usually around midnight, a low humming sound would rise above the mountain. It would last from a few seconds to a couple of minutes, sometimes repeating several times. The sound was so soft that at first it seemed like the wind passing through the gorge. But when you listened more closely, you realized the hum was coming from the pagoda. Researchers have attempted to explain the phenomenon using acoustics. Perhaps the wind does indeed create vibrations inside the bell. However, experiments have shown that even strong air currents are incapable of causing vibrations. The bell is too heavy and too dense. Furthermore, wind directions are limited at night, and the hum occurs even in completely calm weather. Some say the sound is related to temperature. As the night cools, the metal contracts. If there are hidden tensions within it, they can cause vibrations. But why then is the sound only heard on certain nights? And why is it so low, as if it's coming not from the metal, but from deep within the earth? The legend of the third shadow is also worth mentioning. This is the name given to a phenomenon sometimes observed by people spending the night near the pagoda. In the moonlight, the bell casts two normal shadows, one from the bell itself and one from the beam on which it hangs. But sometimes a third shadow appears, narrow and elongated, as if cast by a person standing nearby. This shadow does not move, does not change shape, and disappears as soon as you look away. Scientists attribute this to optical effects, but locals are convinced that this shadow is a sign that the bell remembers those who made it. There's a story about a monk who lived in a pagoda many years ago. He tried to understand the nature of the bell, spending nights next to it. One day, he wrote something strange in his diary. The bell doesn't ring, it listens. Later, the monk said that at night he felt the bell move slightly, a fraction of a millimeter, but enough to feel a vibration beneath his feet. Of course, this could have been a misperception, but the monk's notes are preserved as part of the story of this mystery. Several decades ago, a group of researchers attempted to measure metal vibrations. They installed sensitive sensors on the bell's surface. For several days, nothing happened. Then, one night, the instruments detected faint but rhythmic vibrations. They lasted just over a minute and matched perfectly with local residents' accounts. They had indeed heard a humming sound at the time. However, Data analysis revealed that the vibrations were too uniform, as if generated by something mechanical. After this study, many began to speculate about possible underground processes. Perhaps there's a deep cavity or crack beneath the pagoda that's creating resonance. If weak underground vibrations are occurring there, they could be transmitted to the bell. But then the question arises, why are the vibrations felt so clearly by the bell? Why are other nearby objects silent? Some believe the bell's creators knew about underground structures. Perhaps they built the pagoda in a specific location where the earth creates a special vibration, and the bell was created as an instrument to amplify it, not for music, but to observe what was happening deep underground. But this is just speculation. There is no evidence of such knowledge in the ancient cultures of the region. What's also interesting is that the bell is covered in barely visible symbols. They don't resemble writing, but rather simple shapes, circles, lines, dots. Some consider them decorative elements. Others suggest they are an ancient marking method used to indicate locations associated with certain natural phenomena. But deciphering these symbols is impossible. They are too abstract. There have been attempts to remove the bell and examine its interior. However, all have failed. The metal fittings on which it hangs are so deeply embedded in the frame that even modern tools resist removal. It's as if they weren't intended to be removed. It's as if the bell was meant to hang there forever. Locals have a different story. You can't remove what watches over the mountain. They believe the bell was created not as an instrument, but as a guardian. And the hum they hear at night isn't its sound, but the mountain's response. And if the bell stops hanging, the mountain will fall silent, and people will no longer understand its warnings. Whatever the truth, the Khundan bell remains one of the region's most enigmatic objects. It doesn't ring when it should, and it rings when there's no sound to be made. Its shape, metal, vibrations, and strange symbols make it a subject of debate among historians, geologists, engineers, and even psychologists. But one thing remains constant. Everyone who has stood near the pagoda at night says they felt not just a sound, but a presence. It's as if something deep within the mountain answers questions no one asks out loud. And the bell is merely a mediator between man and what lies beneath the earth. Shadows of Hubei. In the misty province of Hubei, where mountains rise like walls and valleys are filled with cold river streams, there lives a story of shadows that outstrip men. This is the local name for a strange phenomenon observed on the narrow stone paths leading through high passes. These are not ghosts, mirages, or spirit legends. These are real shadows appearing in places where, according to the laws of light, they should not appear. The first mentions of shadows appear in the writings of travelers who traversed these paths many centuries ago. They wrote that sometimes while walking along the stone road, they felt as if someone was walking ahead of them, carefully, leisurely. But when they looked at the ground, they saw a shadow, long and elongated, as if from a person. It moved just like footsteps, but there was no figure ahead. And the closer the traveler got, the more elongated the shadow became, before suddenly vanishing. Modern observers describe the phenomenon in almost identical terms. On paths where the sun is hidden by mountains and light comes from narrow gaps, a shadow appears, resembling a silhouette. Not a person's own silhouette, but someone else's. It's thin, elongated, as if slightly curved. Sometimes its shoulders are slanted, sometimes its head seems elongated. At first glance, it's a common optical effect, but the main point is something else. The shadow moves as if it's ahead of our steps, not following them. Researchers attempting to observe the phenomenon have put forward many hypotheses. One of the first is the reflection of light off wet rocks. Fog often covers the trails, creating distortions of light and shadow. But shadows also appear in dry weather. Moreover, they occur in places where the rock walls are completely matte and non-reflective. There's also a theory about so-called backscatter. At specific angles of the sun and humidity, the air can create the illusion of double contours. However, This theory explains static distortions, not dynamic ones. No one has been able to explain why a shadow appears to move forward, changing speed along with the person. Locals say shadows appear only in certain sections of the trail. They're called corridors. These are narrow stretches between two high cliff walls. A special sound is heard along them, a faint echo that echoes even from the quietest whisper. And it's here, according to locals, that the earth seems to remember the steps taken centuries ago. A shadow isn't a person. It's a memory of a path. Elders in Hubei believe the shadows are connected to those who once perished in these passes. In ancient times, many caravans passed through these mountains. Some perished in avalanches, others disappeared into the fog. Legends say the earth preserves the traces of those who never made it. And sometimes their shadows appear along the way and guide the traveler, as if testing whether they can pass where others have stopped forever. But it's worth acknowledging, not everything in these stories can be attributed to folklore. There is actual evidence from geologists working in Hubei several decades ago. They were studying the structure of the slopes and repeatedly noticed strange silhouettes on the trails. One geologist wrote that he saw his own shadow behind him, but another person's shadow ahead, even though he was walking alone. This shadow was longer than any possible projection at that angle of the sun. It moved slowly at first, then sped up and disappeared behind a rocky outcrop. When the geologist passed the outcrop, no one was there. There's a unique report from a group of tourists who decided to film the phenomenon. The footage shows an elongated dark shape moving along a path. It almost blends in with the rock, but is noticeable in motion. The camera shakes, the image flickers, but the key is clear. The shadow moves forward, and the light source is behind the tourists. However, the real shadow of the people is cast in the opposite direction. Some sections of the trail have a unique stone structure. They are composed of layers containing sparkling crystalline inclusions. These inclusions can absorb and reflect light in unusual ways. But even so, explaining the shadow's movement is difficult. Reflections usually exhibit a delay or distortion. Here, however, the shadow moves in sync with the speed of the walk. And, according to witnesses, it sometimes anticipates it. Among the most terrifying stories is the tale of a guide who once failed to reach the village. His group claimed to have seen a shadow walking ahead of him in a mountain pass. The guide caught up with it and disappeared into the fog a few meters away. When the hikers decided to speed up to catch up, they found only an empty trail. There were no traces of a fall, no rocks had collapsed. The shadow was never seen again. One of the oldest monks at a nearby monastery explained that shadows are places where man and the mountain pass each other. When asked directly what this meant, he simply said, "We see the mountain's shadow through our movements, but sometimes the mountain sees us." These words are difficult to interpret literally, but they reflect the local understanding of the nature of the trail as a point of contact between two worlds, human and natural. Some scientists believe the shadows may be the result of rare atmospheric phenomena similar to those that cause the Brocken specter when a person's silhouette enlarges and projects onto fog. But firstly, the shadow in Hubei moves even in the absence of fog. Secondly, its shape is not human-like, too elongated, poorly proportioned. Thirdly, the shadow often moves away from the light and away from the observer. A research team working on the trails conducted an experiment several years ago. They installed several laser beacons to understand the shape and direction of the light beams. But at one point, the lasers detected a strange deviation. The light was a fraction of a degree off-center. This deviation could explain the distorted shadows, but not the movement. Here, science reaches its limits. People living in that area say shadows appear only when a traveler is alone. If you walk in a group, the phenomenon disappears. If you walk with animals, it disappears. If you walk at night, it disappears. Only solitude and daylight remain. They are certain the shadow is a sign. Some interpret it as a warning, others as a test, still others as a request not to disturb the old paths. There are also stories of shadows freezing. At some point, a person is walking and the shadow ahead of them stops. It stands motionless, as if listening. And if the traveler takes a step forward at this moment, the shadow disappears completely, as if dissolving into stone. Some believe that at such moments they can feel a slight tingling in their hands or face, as if the air has become denser. Psychologists believe shadows may be a result of the stress of traveling alone along dangerous trails. Fatigue, fear, and terrain can create visual illusions. But many travelers who saw shadows were experienced, calm individuals accustomed to difficult routes, and they all describe the phenomenon in the same way. The most mysterious thing is that the phenomenon cannot be reproduced on demand. You can walk the trail dozens of times and see nothing, and then, one day, in one place, the shadow appears and disappears forever. No instruments detect it as an object, but people see it, and this deepens the mystery. The shadows of Hubei remain on the border between two worlds, optics and legend. Science cannot explain movement and synchronicity. Legends speak of the souls of travelers who were not allowed to complete their journey. Geologists speak of the structure of the stone that reflects the memory of light. And locals believe that the mountain itself reveals man's fears. But one thing is certain: once a person encounters such a shadow, they rarely forget it. Because at that moment, they understand they are not alone on the path, and something ancient, quiet, and incomprehensible walks ahead, showing them a path that cannot be fully known and cannot be fully explained. Temple of Baikal. Deep beneath the cold waters of Lake Baikal, where the transparency recedes into the blue abyss, lie stone structures that many call a sunken temple. This isn't a full-fledged building with columns and walls, but rather a complex of large stone slabs, laid so precisely that it's hard to believe they were random. Their arrangement creates shapes too regular for natural chaos: straight lines, almost symmetrical angles, and platforms reminiscent of steps. The first reports of stone formations came from divers at the end of the last century. They described flat slabs lying in layers as if someone had once placed them one on top of the other. Some slabs reach several meters in length. Their edges are remarkably smooth, not perfectly straight, but such that nature doesn't typically create such geometry at great depths. These reports were initially perceived as exaggeration, but more and more people began to discover similar structures. The most astonishing thing is that the slabs aren't simply randomly placed. They form small platforms, like step terraces. Some of them descend at an angle, as if leading to something hidden in the depths. Divers call these places cascades, and each cascade is unique. There's no sense of destruction. On the contrary, it's as if we're looking at ancient work, simply swallowed up by the lake. Baikal is the oldest lake on the planet, and its depths hold many mysteries. The underwater slopes are steep and uneven, dropping for kilometers. But where the temple was found, the terrain is strangely smooth. It seems to have been smoothed by someone or something. Geologists have attempted to explain this by the influence of ancient tectonic processes. But even they admit such smoothness is rare, and the combination with the regular alignment of the plates makes the explanation difficult. Divers descending to the slabs note another peculiarity: an unusual silence. Lake Baikal is quiet enough, but here, sound seems instantly absorbed. Even one's own breath bouncing off their mask sounds different. Some reported feeling a slight vibration in the water, not from the current or equipment, but as if the lake itself were reacting to human presence. There are also old legends. Local peoples spoke of a city or sanctuary that stood by the water of the first depth. It supposedly disappeared after powerful earthquakes, when the earth split apart and the water swallowed up part of the shore. Of course, legends are not proof, but the coincidence with underwater structures is striking. The legends mention huge stones, smooth, as if specially crafted. Divers find exactly these same stones. Some researchers cautiously speculate. Perhaps the water level of Lake Baikal was once lower, and these structures were part of a coastal settlement. Over time, the lake rose, concealing them underwater. This is theoretically possible. Baikal has changed over millennia. But then the logical question arises. Why are the stones so evenly arranged in this particular area? Why do their shapes resemble architecture? There's a theory about ancient plate shifts, when powerful tremors leveled the rock masses. But in that case, the slabs would have been of varying thickness, broken, and bearing traces of chaotic pressure. Here, however, many of the slabs appear to have been laid. They overlap, sometimes forming distinct boundaries. Between them, there are nearly straight lines, reminiscent of seams. But these seams are not typical of natural terrain. What's also interesting is that some of the slabs stand vertically. They're narrow and elongated, as if they were once walls or supports. These vertical fragments are particularly striking to divers. They appear to have somehow maintained their position, despite being located in a deep zone where everything typically collapses under water pressure. What keeps them this way remains an unanswered question. A circular depression, about a meter in diameter, was discovered on one of the slopes. Divers initially thought it was a natural niche. However, its edges were too smooth, as if chiseled. The depression's depth was uniform around its entire circumference. A theory has emerged that in ancient times it served as the base for a wooden or stone pillar that has long since disappeared. However, the origin of this bowl remains controversial. Another strange fact: small stone balls were found near some of the slabs. They are smooth, dense, and remarkably symmetrical, ranging in size from a few centimeters to the width of a palm. Nature rarely creates such shapes, especially in areas without strong water movement. If these were the result of prolonged polishing by a current, the ball's surface would be more uneven. But here, they look almost carved. Some divers have reported a strange sensation when approaching the slabs. It's as if the water's temperature changes slightly. It remains cold, but there's a subtle difference, as if the water is slightly denser than elsewhere. Perhaps it's a result of currents, or perhaps a play of light and perception. But these stories are repeated quite often. There's a bold theory that the structures could have formed due to the collapse of an ancient coastal platform. If some section of land actually slid into the water at an angle, the slabs could have retained the orientation they had on dry land. But even this explanation only explains part of the geometry. The rounded depressions, stepped cascades, and straight edges defy the logic of a random collapse. The most frightening thing is the sound. Several divers claim to hear a low echo in the depths. It appeared infrequently, as if from far away. It didn't sound like technology or like the cracking of ice. It was soft, drawn out, as if someone were sending a signal. Of course, sound travels differently in water, and many things can be confused. But the similarity of the descriptions is alarming. Some believe the echo is related to underwater cracks. Lake Baikal is a tectonic zone, and small movements of the earth can occur underwater. But then, why is the echo heard specifically near structures? And why is it so smooth? Vibrations in Earth's rock are usually chaotic, but here there seems to be a pattern. There's also a theory about underwater methane bubbles that sometimes emerge from below. They do create sounds, but usually high-pitched and harsh ones. Here, however, there's a low hum, reminiscent of a distant organ. And the strangest thing is, it's not accompanied by any gas rising to the surface. The water remains clear and calm. Another mystery is the depth. Many slabs lie at a level difficult to reach due to cold water and limited visibility. But those who have managed to descend deeper claim that there are additional structures beneath the slabs. It's as if this is only the surface layer. But diving there is dangerous, and no one has yet been able to thoroughly explore the lower levels. Sometimes thin white lines appear on the slabs. They resemble marks left by a gentle touch, but on stone. They disappear after a few days. Scientists believe this is the effect of bacteria or minerals that grow and disappear depending on temperature. But some divers claim the lines resemble the initial outlines of drawings. This is, of course, a subjective impression, but it adds to the mystery. There's a saying among locals, "Baikal took the temple, but not the memory." People believe that an ancient sanctuary built by an unknown people once stood on this site, and that the lake preserved these stones for a reason, as if protecting them from destruction. The Temple of Baikal remains one of the lake's strangest and least studied discoveries. It could be an ancient settlement, a geological phenomenon, the remains of a landslide, or something we can't yet explain. But its smooth lines, strange depressions, stone spheres, and profound silence make it truly unique. And everyone who dives into its waters returns not just with photos and measurements, but with the feeling of having touched something ancient, hidden, and that Baikal has revealed only a small part of what lies beneath its icy, mirror-like surface. Pillars of Scandinavia. In northern Scandinavia, amidst the harsh tundra plains and ancient granite massifs jutting from the earth, stand strange stone formations known locally as pillars. They rise from the ground, singly or in small groups, sometimes reaching the height of a human, sometimes much higher. At first glance, they appear to be ordinary geological formations, sculpted by time and wind, but the longer you look, the less you believe in chance. Most of the pillars have an elongated shape, resembling irregularly cut columns. Their surfaces are rough, but in a few places there are areas that appear to have been deliberately smoothed. These areas are located at the same height, approximately at chest level. It was this repetitiveness that led the researchers to wonder, if nature had been creating the pillars for centuries, why do they contain similar elements? Some of the pillars stand on strange foundations, flat, carefully aligned stones. These foundations are much smoother than the natural terrain. Sometimes they resemble a platform used to prepare a stone for installation. However, the corners of the platform are too right-angled to have formed by chance. Geologists have attempted to explain this by the nature of rock fracture, but have yet to find a precise model that replicates this shape. There are pillars that seem to be slightly tilted to one side, as if someone had pushed them. But the tilt is always uniform, pointing toward the nearest hill. Such a repeating pattern seems unlikely if we're talking about a purely natural process. If the wind were causing the tilt, the directions would vary. But here, there's a consistent trend. It doesn't look like chaotic destruction, but rather like some kind of common mechanism. Locals have preserved legends about guardians of the tundra. They say the pillars are figures created by those who lived here in ancient times. According to legend, these figures were meant to guide people through the fog as they moved from one tribal area to another. But if they were, the pillars would have been placed closer to trails, not in the middle of the wilderness where there are no routes. Furthermore, some of the pillars are too massive to have been erected by ancient nomads with their primitive tools. A researcher in the mid-20th century noted that the pillars create strange acoustics. When a person stands between two pillars at a certain distance, the sound of their voice becomes deeper and muffled. This doesn't happen everywhere, but in certain places the effect is repeated. It's as if the pillars create a resonant corridor, even though there's no physical structure between them. Skeptics say it's a trick of the wind, but many have heard the effect even in calm weather. Another peculiarity is the stone's temperature. In winter, the pillars should be uniformly cold. However, measurements have shown that some remain slightly warmer than the surrounding air, despite being located in identical conditions. The difference is minimal but consistent. Geologists have suggested that the stone may have a special structure or minerals that absorb solar heat. However, the constant temperature, even at night, casts doubt on this theory. Expeditions working in the area around the pillars often noted softer ground around some of them, as if the soil there wasn't as dense as in the rest of the tundra. Sometimes scientists found areas where the ground sank under a person's weight more than usual. This led to the idea that the pillars might not be entirely made of stone, but rather extend much deeper into the ground than they appeared. However, the measurements taken were inconclusive. One pillar actually had a deep root, while another stood almost at the surface. One of the most puzzling observations concerns a small pillar surrounded by three others. On a sunny day, thin lines of light were detected on its surface. They appeared to be crawling across the stone. This lasted for several seconds and disappeared as soon as a cloud obscured the sun. Scientists attributed this to reflections from ice crystals, but the effect persisted even when the crystals were absent. Sometimes thin horizontal scratches are found on the pillars. They are located at the same height, which is particularly odd. The tribes that once lived here may have left marks, but most of the scratches are too smooth, as if made by a metal tool. However, metal was not available in such quantities in ancient Scandinavia, and the scratches are too fine to be the work of large tools. There are stories of hunters who claim to hear a quiet hum near the poles at night. It was low and steady, like a distant engine. There are no sources of such a sound in the tundra, no rivers, no vehicles, no machinery. Some speculate that it is the sound of freezing ground, but then it should spread throughout the entire area, not be localized around the rocks. The most astonishing fact concerns the orientation of the pillars. Experts have noticed that some of them are aligned with the direction of sunrise during certain periods of the year. This suggests an ancient observation system. Perhaps these stones were used to track time or seasonal changes. But if so, why are they so widely spaced? And why are many of them located in locations that have no direct connection to human activity? Some of the pillars are striking in their size. One of the largest, over 3 meters tall, stands on the edge of a rocky plateau, seemingly overlooking the valley. A subtle pattern is visible on its surface, vertical depressions resembling frozen droplets. The depressions are too uniform to be natural weathering. However, no one can explain how such marks could have appeared if the stone stood exposed to the sky for centuries. It's also interesting that there are almost no animal tracks near the pillars. The tundra typically yields numerous paw prints, but around some of the pillars, the ground is bare. Perhaps the animals simply avoid the uneven terrain. Perhaps they smell minerals that humans cannot detect, but the lack of tracks seems too systematic to be random. Locals tell a legend about a stone circle that once brought people protection. They say that standing between the pillars would cause a warmth or a slight tingling sensation in the hands. This was attributed to the power of the earth or ancient spirits. Of course, such stories are now dismissed as folklore, but those who have spent nights near the pillars often report a strange sensation, as if the air becomes denser. Among the expedition logs, there's a note about the pillars emitting barely audible sounds during strong temperature changes. The explorer described it as a stone sigh. It was so soft that it could be mistaken for one's own breathing. But other participants heard the same thing, making a random explanation less likely. Despite numerous studies, the pillars of Scandinavia remain a mystery. They are too perfect to be entirely attributable to natural forces and too chaotic to be considered ancient structures. Perhaps they are a unique combination of geology, climate, minerals, and time. Or perhaps they are the remains of ancient cultures about which we know too little. And yet, everyone who has stood beside these stone giants says the same thing. They resemble not just a form, but a silhouette, like frozen figures silently gazing out over the tundra. And when the wind passes through them, they seem to communicate with one another in a way that only stone can, having survived many eras and retained its silence. Weeping Cave. Hidden among the rocky ridges and gorges of the Azaria mountainous region lies a cave locals call the Weeping Cave. This name is no accident. Sounds resembling quiet sobs or drops of water falling on stone can be heard inside, though there's almost no water inside. This is no ordinary drip. There's no stream or underground spring here. But the sound recurs regularly, as if someone invisible were truly crying deep within. The cave's entrance is narrow, almost hidden among boulders. Externally, it's no different from dozens of similar caves in the region, but within the first few meters, it's clear this place is unusual. The air inside is denser than outside and slightly warmer. The scent of damp stone is mixed with a barely noticeable metallic tint. Some researchers believe this is due to minerals, but their concentration is too low to produce such a pronounced odor. The first thing people notice is the sound. It comes unexpectedly. At first, it's faint, barely perceptible. Then it grows louder. It's not the echo of footsteps or the rustling of clothes. It's a rhythmic drip, quiet, steady, as if someone invisible is dropping drops of water onto a stone surface. But when they turn on the light and look around, the floor remains dry. Even in the places where, judging by the acoustics, the sound should be coming from, there's no trace of moisture. Some claim the sound changes depending on the number of people inside. If you enter in a group, it almost disappears. If you enter alone, it becomes clearer. This has led to debate about whether this is an acoustic phenomenon or something else. Psychologists talk about heightened human sensitivity in silence. Geologists talk about hidden cavities. But neither explanation is entirely satisfactory. Deep in the cave is a small chamber called the core. Its walls are covered with smooth vertical stripes, as if left by streams of water. However, geologists claim that there has been no water in this part of the mountains, either in the past or present. The stone stripes resemble traces of a very slow shift of mineral matter, but only on this wall. The other walls are completely dry and rough. During one expedition, researchers noticed a thin layer of crystalline deposits on these stripes. It glowed with a faint bluish tint when hit by light. Analysis revealed that these were ordinary mineral salts, but their arrangement was too even, as if someone had deliberately created the pattern. This sparked new discussions about whether ancient human rituals could have taken place here. Local legends say the cave remembers voices. People swear that sometimes you can hear not just dripping water inside, but muffled moans. This is what shepherds who spent the night at the entrance and old men who saw the cave in their youth say. One man said he heard a heavy sigh inside at night, as if someone was suffering in the darkness. He fled without looking back, convinced the spirit of a dead traveler resided within. However, more cautious observers believe the sounds may be related to a rare type of vibration in rock masses. If the rock is compressed and released during the day due to temperature fluctuations, this can cause acoustic effects. But why do the sounds only occur late at night? Why do they sound so much like drops? And why are quiet groaning sounds sometimes heard? Some explorers claimed the cave had a hidden lower level. Its entrance was discovered by chance, a narrow crack in the floor, barely visible without light. It descends at an angle into the darkness, where the sound becomes louder. However, descent is only possible using narrow ropes and specialized equipment. One explorer reported a slight air movement at depth, barely noticeable but constant. This could be a hidden channel connecting the cave to another chamber. But if there is an airflow, why is there no trace of moisture in the cave? Temperature measurements were taken at a depth of several meters. They found it to be stable, almost the same at any time of day. This is surprising, considering that the upper part of the cave is dependent on external conditions. It seems as if the deeper part lives by its own rules, maintaining warm air regardless of the season. There's another mystery. Sometimes, when the sound gets louder, people feel a slight vibration under their feet. It lasts a second or two. It doesn't sound like an earthquake. It's more like the distant roar of the ocean, even though the water is very far away. It feels as if something huge, yet hidden, is moving around. Some have compared the vibration to a pulse, soft, rhythmic. One report describes a case in which a researcher, while alone, heard a sound resembling a gentle cry. The sound was so quiet that it could have been his own imagination. But the man said he was certain the crying lasted nearly a minute, fading from a barely audible sob to a steady, quiet creaking. When he turned on the light, the sound disappeared. He said he never went there alone again. Some scientists are considering the possibility that the sounds may be emanating from an underground lake. If there is indeed an aquifer beneath the cave, pressure changes could create similar acoustic effects. However, soil tests have revealed no moisture, no sand, soil, or minerals indicating underground water were found. It's also suggested that the sounds are related to mineral crystallization. Some salts, under certain conditions, can indeed make faint noises as they grow or crack. But these processes are too slow and don't create rhythm. But here, there is rhythm. The sounds come in bursts, then fade away. It's as if someone is crying and calming down. Old stories mention objects previously found in the cave that could not have belonged to modern humans. Stone beads, smooth and round, fragments of carved figurines, small flat stones with neat indentations. Some believe the cave may have been a site of ancient tribal rituals. Perhaps people came here to listen to the voice of the stone, believing it to be a message from the spirits. Several attempts have been made to conduct a large-scale study, but each time obstacles arose. Either the equipment failed due to humidity, or the sound levels were too weak to record. It seems as if the cave itself decides when to reveal its sounds. One researcher said, "Only those it allows to hear can hear here." To this day, the Weeping Cave remains a mystery. There are sounds, dozens of people hear them, but they cannot be explained. There is no water, no animals, no cracks that create drops, no underground rivers. But there are strange vibrations, smooth stripes on the walls, fading sounds, warm air in the depths, and a sense of presence. Quiet, unwelcome, but not dangerous. Everyone who emerges from the cave says the same thing. The crying doesn't sound threatening. It sounds lonely. As if something deep within the mountain is trying to tell its story, but can't utter a word, only dripping quietly and waiting for someone to hear. Kalahari Metal. In the hot Kalahari Desert, where the earth cracks in the sun and the wind carries reddish-yellow sand for kilometers, stories are told of strange metal fragments found deep beneath the soil. Locals call them desert fragments. They are smooth, heavy, and cooler to the touch than the surrounding air, even when exposed to direct sunlight. Their origin remains unclear. Neither historical artifacts nor traces of ore mining match them. The first discoveries appeared in the last century, when hunters noticed a faint metallic sheen in the sand. The stones they picked up were too heavy to be ordinary desert rock. The surface was smooth, as if polished by water, though there was no water here. Sometimes the shape resembled fragments of something larger, rounded edges, slightly curved surfaces, as if part of a shell. People thought these were pieces of a meteorite, but analysis later revealed that the metal's composition didn't match any known type of celestial rock. When the researchers attempted to examine the finds, even more oddities emerged. The metal showed little reaction to impact. Even strong impacts left only weak, barely noticeable dents. Meanwhile, the sample's interior revealed a heterogeneous structure, as if it were composed of several layers seamlessly joined together. This property resembles modern composite materials, but the origin of the fragments predates any technology in the region. Some of the finds exhibited an unusual property. When brought to a flame, the outer layer heated slowly, and then retained the heat for an astonishingly long time, as if distributing the heat internally. This behavior is unusual for ordinary desert metals. Geologists hypothesized that the metal contained rare inclusions, but they were unable to determine which ones. The composition was too unusual. The most mysterious place is the so-called Red Depression. It's a small patch of land where metal is most often found. The soil here is denser, the sand darker. Some believe a powerful event once occurred here, an impact, an explosion, or the fall of something heavy. But there are no signs of a crater. The surface is only slightly concave, as if the earth had sunk under pressure. There's another oddity inside the basin. Compasses are unstable, the needle wobbles, sometimes shifting several degrees. This is unusual for the desert. There are no large magnetic rocks here. Magnetic anomalies are common in mountains or near iron deposits. But the Kalahari has neither. People who have experienced this claim that the metal somehow influences the magnetic field. Local tribes circulate a legend about sand balls, creatures that descended from the sky in fiery lines, leaving behind black footprints. Of course, this is just ancient folklore, but surprisingly, the legends mention a metal that didn't burn in fire and couldn't be broken by stones. This completely matches the findings. Some fragments have strange depressions, even as if carved with a tool. The depressions form arcs and lines running at uniform angles. They resemble traces of fastenings or connections. But what such elements could have been attached to is unknown. Moreover, the depressions are located on internal surfaces, as if they were the inner layer of some larger object. There's another peculiarity. When touched, the metal feels colder than it should. This property is sometimes found in minerals, but is unusual for metallic objects. Researchers measured the temperature and found that the metal absorbs heat more slowly and releases it more slowly than conventional alloys. It feels as if it lives by its own rules. One explorer reported hearing a barely perceptible hum while standing near the red hollow. It didn't seem to come from the ground, but rather from the metal itself. Faint, low, like the vibrations of a distant mechanism. When he held a fragment to his ear, the sound grew slightly louder. But as soon as he removed his hand, the hum disappeared. No one else heard anything at the time, but this account is still repeated to this day. There's a theory that these are ancient meteorites that fell here long ago and were then repeatedly pulverized by time. However, meteorites have a layered structure, layers of rock, metal, and nickel. Here, the structure is uniform, without natural inclusions. Furthermore, many of the fragments are too smooth, as if part of an artificial structure. Some believe these are the remains of ancient terrestrial technologies, lost to time. However, historical data from the region does not support the existence of such a sophisticated metallurgy. Furthermore, the shapes of the fragments are extremely odd. Some resemble parts of spherical components, others like sections of thin plates, and still others like fragments of complex assemblies. It's difficult to imagine that all of these are simply remnants of natural soap. Attempts were made to scan the ground around the depression. Instruments detected several solid objects at a depth of several meters. But digging here is difficult. The ground is hard, as if caked, and when researchers tried to drill a small section, the drill got stuck, hitting something solid. Metal? Rock? A crack? No one knows. Some expeditions claim there are signs of scorching on the debris, a thin layer, as if the metal had been subjected to high temperatures. But the structure isn't destroyed. On the contrary, it appears strengthened. This is strange. Metal usually melts or deforms in fire. But here, there's only a thin border resembling a burn mark, as if the metal withstood extreme temperatures and then remained intact. There are stories of hunters seeing faint bluish lights above the depression at night. Not bright, not moving, just a flickering as if from a discharge. Perhaps these are gases escaping from the ground or electrostatic effects. But why do they appear precisely where metal is found? And yet, the sounds remain the most impressive. Sometimes people walking through the desert report hearing a soft ringing sound like a blow against a metal surface. But there's nothing around. This sound doesn't repeat and isn't recorded by instruments, yet the stories are similar, even though the people involved often don't know each other. This creates the feeling that the desert harbors an invisible source that occasionally makes its presence known. Kalahari metal remains one of the most bizarre discoveries in the region. It's too strong, too cold, too structurally unusual to be easily attributed to natural processes. But there's also no evidence of artificial origin. It's a mixture of antiquity, geology, legend, and something that doesn't yet fit within the framework of known technology. Those who have held this metal in their hands say the same thing. It feels like it's not from here. But where it came from, no one can say. And perhaps the Kalahari Desert will keep this secret for a long time, allowing people to find only fragments, but not the whole, which could one day have been something much greater. Voices of Redland. In the arid, rocky lands of Redland, where the red soil crumbles beneath feet and the horizons stretch endlessly, people hear sounds that belong neither to the wind, nor to animals, nor to technology. These sounds are called Redland voices. They resemble distant phrases, whispers, fragments of words, but never form a coherent speech. They are heard by travelers, explorers, geologists, and years later, everyone remembers the sensation as if it happened yesterday. The ground here consists of porous rock cracked by the heat. Narrow crevices extend to an unknown depth. Many believe the sounds originate there, in the stone cracks. But when researchers descended inside, the sounds disappeared. They returned only when they returned to the surface. This is the first strange property. The voices are heard from outside, but not inside the spring. The most common sound resembles a drawn-out whisper. It moves across the plain as if rolling from one crevice to another. Sometimes the whisper seems to call, sometimes a warning. People often describe it as the voices of several people speaking at once, but so quietly that not a single word can be discerned. Travelers sometimes stop in the middle of the wasteland, listen intently, and realize that their minds are trying to grasp meaning where there is none. Some believe the voices are the result of wind passing through a complex system of cracks. But in Redland, there are periods of complete calm when the air is still. And on these days, the voices are especially clear. The sounds arise without the slightest air movement and continue to walk across the plain for minutes, sometimes almost an hour. This doesn't match any wind models. There are ancient records of geological expeditions that passed through Redland in the last century. One geologist wrote, "I heard a voice that seemed to repeat my name, not distinctly, but the rhythm was similar." He was certain that fatigue couldn't have caused such a hallucination. He was rested, and the night had passed peacefully. His colleagues heard the same thing, but each heard a different set of sounds. Some heard a woman's voice, others a low male voice, and still others heard what sounded like children's laughter. But the recordings were blank. Instruments are a different story. The sounds people hear are rarely captured by technology. Microphones pick up only a faint rustling sound, similar to the ordinary hum of the desert. But the human ear discerns structure in this rustling: rhythm, repetition, pauses, intonation. It's as if the range of sounds is too narrow or too complex for conventional equipment. Or perhaps the sound is something intermediate between acoustics and vibration, something the equipment can't detect. In one of the Redland neighborhoods, there was an old monitoring station. At night, researchers often heard voices near the metal structures. The sound bounced off the antennas and walls, creating the sensation of someone walking around the station. Several times people went outside, certain they were standing there. But the street was empty, only sky and rocks. However, the voices were so clear that the researchers described them not as whispers, but as conversations behind a thin wall. There's a report of a night shift where 2 employees heard a voice utter a short phrase, as if in an unknown language. But when they tried to record the sound, the microphone picked up only a faint vibrational echo. The people claimed to have heard speech, but the device picked up nothing but a low frequency. Some sounds resemble short knocks, like stone striking stone. But these knocks are repeated too regularly, sometimes in series of 5 or 6 knocks, sometimes in a specific rhythm. Neither animals nor natural processes can create such repeating sequences. This has led to the hypothesis that the knocks may be caused by the expansion of the stone in the sun. But they are also heard at night when the stones cool evenly. Locals have long held a legend about a talking valley in Redland. Elders believe the land here remembers the people who passed through these places. They tell of travelers who disappeared in ancient times, and that the voices are their whispers trying to find their way. This is, of course, folklore. But what's surprising is that the legends mention a peculiarity. The voices often echo their footsteps. Indeed, some explorers have heard whispers precisely when they stepped across the stones. A researcher was standing at the edge of a crevice when he heard a voice that he said uttered a short word. He didn't understand what it was, but the sound was so distinct that he froze. Then the sound repeated itself. The researcher described it as almost a human voice, but as if coming through stone. There was no one around for several kilometers. There are theories about underground cavities. If there are large voids underground, sound can travel through the stone in a strange way, creating the illusion of speech. But scanning of several areas of Redland revealed that beneath the stone layer is dense rock without significant cavities. It's a strange sensation. There is sound, but no space through which it could travel. One expedition used thermal sensors. They recorded slight fluctuations in air temperature simultaneously with the appearance of the voices. This led the researchers to believe the sound might be related to small discharges of static electricity caused by the heat and dryness. However, such discharges typically produce sharp crackling sounds. Here, the sound is soft, even, and smooth. Some travelers describe the phenomenon more emotionally. One said, "When you hear voices, it seems the desert is alive. It breathes. It knows you're here." Indeed, many report a strange sense of presence, as if there's something nearby, unseen but audible. And it doesn't evoke fear, rather a wary respect. Among the researchers was a woman who decided to spend the night alone in Redland. She wrote in her diary that she heard a voice that seemed to mimic her breathing. The sound appeared when she took a deep breath and disappeared when she held it. She claimed the voice wasn't her own reflection. It came from in front of her, not from the stone. Such behavior is impossible for a normal sound. Sometimes the voices are accompanied by ground vibrations. They are very weak, so weak that they can only be felt while standing barefoot. They resemble a faint pulse in the earth. The vibrations last no more than a second, always appear unexpectedly, and disappear instantly. Geologists have recorded such vibrations several times, but each time they were too weak and did not correspond to any known seismic process in the region. There are stories of voices sometimes appearing before sudden weather changes. A few hours after the whispers appear, a strong wind or rare rain may begin. Perhaps the voices are harbingers of change caused by fluctuations in pressure. But how can the vocal intonations be explained? And yet, the strangest part of the mystery is that Redland's voices are never the same. Each time the sound changes slightly. Some hear laughter, some crying, some words. But always it's as if it's not just a sound, but an attempt to say something. But to say it in a way that's incomprehensible. The Redland voices remain one of the most difficult phenomena to explain. They are a mixture of geology, acoustics, human perception, and something else, something that defies scientific models. They are neither threatening nor frightening, but they make one wonder, what is truly resonating in the stones of this ancient wasteland? And do we hear the voices of the earth, or does it hear us? Monastery of Tibet. In the highlands of Tibet, amidst narrow passes and icy peaks, there's a legend about a monastery that one day vanished. Not destroyed, not abandoned, it vanished. Old texts call it the house without doors, because chronicles mention the monastery's walls seemingly changing shape, turning into smooth stone from which neither entrance nor exit could be found. This mystery lived on in oral tradition for centuries, until last century, when a group of researchers discovered strange traces on one of the plateaus. Here, at altitude, where the air is thin and cold, lay enormous stone blocks, smooth, carefully leveled. They did not belong to any known Tibetan building style. The blocks were too straight, too even, and too heavy to be lifted and placed by monks without sophisticated tools. Some of the blocks formed a dilapidated platform, resembling the foundation of a large structure. But most importantly, barely noticeable indentations were found in the stones, resembling traces of old decorative patterns. They were so worn that they might have appeared natural. However, in certain light, lines running parallel and at the same angle emerged on the stone. Such repetition is rare in nature. Locals claim that in their youth their ancestors saw walls here, not ruins, walls. White, smooth, as if laid out of perfectly fitted stones. They say the monks lived there in isolation, never receiving guests. Occasionally, shepherds would approach the walls, but no one ever saw doors. The walls seemed solid, and yet people sensed life beyond them. Legends say the monks knew how to hide their space. They supposedly possessed a unique way to direct sunlight so that the walls became invisible. But this, of course, is a myth. However, another interesting fact. Even today, standing on the plateau at certain times of day, you can see a strange distortion in the air above the blocks. It resembles a slight shimmer, as if heat were rising above the stones. But the temperature there is almost always the same. There are diaries of travelers who once spent the night at the foot of the plateau. They wrote of hearing sounds, quiet, muffled, like rhythmic thumps or footsteps within a void. The sound repeated several times, then disappeared. The expedition members were convinced it was the echoes of rockfalls, but it later turned out that there had been no rockfalls that night. The sound resembled not the sound of falling stones, but footsteps on a wooden floor. Some researchers have suggested that the monastery may have disappeared as a result of a landslide. This happens in Tibet. Entire sections of hills can slide down, hiding buildings beneath. But the rock where the monastery stood is too stable. Furthermore, there are no signs of major landslides on the plateau. The soil structure has been unchanged for centuries, and the blocks found on the surface are too smooth and neat, as if they were left there deliberately. One story mentions that during times of drought, local residents would climb up to the plateau to beg the monks for help. They heard voices beyond the walls, but saw no people. Sometimes at night, a light seemed to glow inside, even though there were no windows. This light emanated a soft, even glow, like the moon's reflection on water. But it was impossible to explain. If the walls were solid, where could the light have come from? There are also reports of strange architectural elements. Some researchers have found traces of decorative notches in the stones, which could have been used to secure wooden structures. However, these notches are too small and thin to support large beams. They more closely resemble elements of a complex mechanical connection. And what's most bizarre is that these connections were found among the stones several meters apart, as if they belonged to different parts of the building. A geologist working here in the mid-20th century noticed a long, straight cut on one of the blocks, as if made by something incredibly sharp. The cut was perfectly smooth, running the entire length of the stone. No natural process could have created such a line. Moreover, the cut was so fine that it could only be seen under a certain angle of light. The geologist hypothesized that the stones had been carved by ancient craftsmen using techniques unknown to modern times. Another strange aspect is the lack of traces of habitation. If there was a monastery here, there should have been pottery shards, remnants of pottery, charred pieces of wood, tools, at least fragments of fabric. But everything is empty, as if the place had been cleared. Only smooth stones lie where the walls once stood. It seems as if the monastery vanished instantly, leaving no trace of life. Some believe the monastery may have been built on a wooden frame, with the stone blocks serving only as a foundation. In that case, the wood could have rotted or burned, leaving the stones behind. But why, then, do the blocks appear to have been rearranged? Some lie in neat lines, others stand alone, but they are always face up, as if carefully placed. Local legends speak of an event that occurred in the year when there was no light. This expression refers to a period of prolonged fog or sandstorms. It is said that during this time, the monastery disappeared. people who came to the walls found only an empty plateau. The walls seemed to have dissolved. They believed the monks had gone up the mountain, that is, crossed over to another world, and the monastery took them with it. One old man told me he heard his grandfather tell of a night when a strange sound rose above the plateau, low, drawn out, like the vibrations of a huge bell. But in Tibetan monasteries, such bells are loud and shrill. This sound, however, was soft, as if coming from underground. People were afraid to approach, but when dawn broke, nothing remained on the plateau but smooth stones. The most mysterious thing remains that even today, people occasionally hear sounds on the plateau. Very quiet. Something reminiscent of the light creaking of wood, or a footstep on the floor, or a distant echo as if someone were moving inside the stone. But there are no buildings there anymore. Tibet's monastery remains one of the region's most inexplicable mysteries. It should have left traces, but it didn't. It should have stood for centuries, but it vanished. The stones should have been chaotic, but they form neat lines. The sounds should have died, but they live on. Perhaps this is a remnant of ancient architecture created by masters unknown to us. Perhaps it is the result of a powerful natural phenomenon. Or perhaps something happened there on that night when there was no light, and history has preserved only traces, stone blocks, strange carvings, and a silence that speaks louder than any words. Flashes of Arabia. In the southern Arabian desert, where dunes rise higher than houses and nights become blacker than coal, there exists a phenomenon locals call silent flashes. These flashes sometimes appear in the sands in the dead of night, bright, brief, like momentary bursts of light, but without a sound. They appear sometimes on the horizon, sometimes very close, illuminating the sand with a strange white glow and leaving behind only the sensation that space has momentarily trembled. The first mentions of flashes come from nomads' tales. They said that at night, heavenly lights sometimes ignite among the dunes, but they don't glow or move. The flash lasts a split second, after which the darkness deepens. Some claimed that after such flashes, the sand beneath their feet suddenly became slightly warm. However, the air temperature remained constant. Modern travelers describe the phenomenon similarly. On one of the darkest nights, the desert is suddenly illuminated by a patch of light, even white without color. The light appears as if from within the sand or air, and then vanishes. There is no thunder, no echo, no rustle. Some compare it to lightning, others to a brief camera flash. But the main difference is complete silence. Lightning is always accompanied by a roar. Here, there is absolute emptiness. Scientists have attempted to explain the phenomenon by using atmospheric discharges. Electrostatic discharges can occur in extremely dry conditions and the constant friction of sand. But why are they so bright? And why do they appear above the sand and not between objects? Furthermore, electrostatic flashes are usually accompanied by a faint crackling sound, an audible trace. Here, however, there is silence, so complete it seems impossible. Some researchers have tried to observe the flashes with cameras, but the problem is that they occur completely randomly. People can walk for weeks through the desert and see nothing. And then suddenly, on a lonely, moonless night, several flashes occur in a matter of seconds at different altitudes. The cameras only recorded a sharp change in brightness in the frame with no visible source. This makes the phenomenon even more mysterious. There are stories of the sand changing slightly after some flares. It becomes denser on the surface, as if the top layer were slightly sintered. Geologists attributed this to a possible effect of temperature. But the flares are too short-lived to heat the sand, especially without sound, especially without evidence of fire or plasma. One of the strangest experiences occurred with a group of researchers spending the night in a tent. During the night, a bright flash illuminated the desert as if it were daylight. The group woke up and ran outside. At that very moment, they felt a slight pressure in their ears as if they were suddenly lifted into the air. but the wind remained still and the temperature remained stable. Only one pressure gauge showed a sudden, brief jump. It felt as if space had momentarily changed density. There are even more frightening stories. Several travelers claim to have seen a silhouette for a moment during the flash, tall, elongated, standing motionless on the top of a dune. But as soon as the light faded, so did the silhouette. Of course, this could be an optical illusion. In the dark, the eye often draws figures. But the similarity of the descriptions is alarming. Among the local tribes, there's an ancient legend about dunes that breathe light. The legend says the desert sometimes tests those who enter, illuminating their path for a second to reveal their destination. The legend is ancient, and it includes references to silent flashes that bring omens, good or bad, depending on whether the light is seen alone or in a group. One of the most unusual observations involved shadow changes. Several travelers reported that during a flash, their shadows were cast in the wrong direction, not from the center of the light, but as if from a different source. That is, the flash emanated from the left and the shadow fell to the right. Such behavior is impossible under any known physical conditions. This gave rise to the disturbing idea that the flashes might not be the source of the light, but rather an instantaneous change in the overall illumination of the space. Researchers tried to measure the electromagnetic pulses that might accompany such phenomena. But the sensors detected nothing, no radio frequency waves, no magnetic surges. This makes the phenomenon even more mysterious. Any light is usually associated with electromagnetic processes. But here, it's as if the light exists separately. Some believe the flashes are the result of sand friction when a strong wind creates a charge that then explodes into light. But flashes also occur on windless nights and are too bright to be a normal discharge. Others believe they are rare atmospheric phenomena associated with a sudden cooling of the air. But then, clicking sounds would be audible. And here, as luck would have it, there is perfect silence. There were instances of flashes following one another, moving along the dune. People described it as a running light, as if someone were moving across the sand, leaving a trail of light. But the instruments recorded nothing. The cameras showed only sharp white streaks, vague, distorted shapes. It seemed as if the flashes were happening at the edge of human perception, so fast that the equipment couldn't capture the details. Some flashes occur right underfoot. People see the sand glow from within for a second, then fade. But no thermal energy is felt. No burns, no charred marks. The sand remains as if nothing had happened. There's a theory that the flashes are related to the pressure created by huge sand masses. If air is compressed deep within, it can be forced upward, creating a flash of light. But the pressure required is colossal. Moreover, such processes must be ongoing, while flashes are rare, unpredictable, and unrelated to the weather. One researcher described the flash as an instantaneous loss of night. For a second, everything around was bright, but the light was strange, as if without a source, without direction. It created no shadows, did not illuminate the air. It simply was, as if the darkness itself had vanished and then returned. It's this very property, the absence of a shadow, that seems most inexplicable. Light always creates a shadow, but here it doesn't. It fundamentally contradicts physics. And yet, time and again, people say the same thing. My shadow wasn't there during the flash. Arabia's silent flashes remain one of the desert's most inscrutable mysteries. They're not lightning, not dust, not reflections. They're a phenomenon that seems not to belong to our world of light and sound, only briefly intruding, only to vanish, leaving behind hot sand and the feeling that the desert is watching. Island with two shadows. In the warm seas near the equator, among a number of small archipelagos, there is an island that sailors call Two Shadow Island. This name comes not from legend, but from observations made by generations of people passing by. A strange phenomenon really does exist on the island. Objects and people cast not one, but two shadows. Not constantly, not every minute, but at certain hours of the day, at certain points on the island. The second shadow appears where, according to the laws of light, it should not appear. The island is small. Its shape resembles a rocky arc, lifted from the water as if by underground forces. The shores are rocky, and in the center grows a dense, dark forest, concealing old trails. The island is uninhabited. There's too little fresh water and too many difficult-to-reach areas. But it has long attracted the attention of explorers, travelers, and sailors, because the double shadow phenomenon recurs not only in folklore, but also in actual expedition reports. The phenomenon was first recorded by sailors several centuries ago. One navigator described seeing his own shadow split into two at dawn, one cast seaward, the other in the opposite direction. He thought he was blinded by heat or fatigue, but later the rest of the crew witnessed the same effect. The sun was low and steady at the time, and there was no additional light source. Nevertheless, the shadows were clear and deep. Modern expeditions have confirmed the phenomenon's reality. A second shadow does indeed appear in certain areas of the island, slightly weaker than the first, more diffuse, but noticeable enough to be photographed. However, no additional light source exists. Laser instruments, spectrometers, and brightness sensors reveal nothing that could explain the second projection. Many researchers believe the phenomenon is caused by light reflection off the sea surface. However, reflected light always creates highlights, not true shadows. Moreover, shadows should be at a different angle, whereas here, two shadows are almost parallel, only slightly diverging. Furthermore, the phenomenon also occurs deep in the forest, where the sea is completely invisible. This invalidates the reflection hypothesis. Some geologists believe the cause may be specific minerals contained in the island's rocks. These minerals supposedly can refract light in unusual ways, creating a secondary projection. However, the rock samples taken by the researchers revealed nothing unusual. They were ordinary basalts and limestones, with no signs of the rare crystalline inclusions that could create optical illusions. There's another theory, a thermal one. Some researchers believe that the heating of the air above certain areas of the island could create a secondary aerial projection, similar to a mirage. But mirages don't create shadows. They create images, distorted shapes, but not clear black projections on the ground. And a shadow is an absence of light. For a shadow to appear, something must block the light. But there's no second sun on the island, no light pillars, no auroras that could replace the source. The strangest part of the phenomenon is that the second shadow sometimes moves differently than the first. Several instances have been recorded where the weaker shadow would lag behind, or conversely, move slightly faster than the main one. One researcher reported seeing his second shadow twitch, as if it momentarily misaligned with the position of his hand. He raised his hand slowly and saw a discrepancy in the movement. One shadow rose smoothly, the other seemed to lag behind. A second later, the shadows aligned again. Such observations have led some to speculate that the second shadow is not a projection of light, but the result of some other physical process. For example, the interaction of light with dense layers of air, which move differently than the upper layers. Such dense layers should be noticeable. They would alter visibility, creating airborne distortions. But the air in these areas is clear and transparent, and no lens effects are observed. Deep in the forest, there's a small clearing that expeditions call the shadow circle. This clearing is where shadows appear most often. It's a circular space surrounded by trees with flat, strangely smooth ground. When people stand in the center of the clearing, a second shadow can appear almost instantly, even when the sun is high above the horizon. This seems impossible. Direct sunlight shouldn't create images at a right angle. But in the clearing, it does. Some people describe sensations arising in the circle of shadows. The silence becomes denser. The air seems heavier. A slight sense of pressure arises, as if someone is watching. Of course, a psychological factor cannot be ruled out. Unusual phenomena always cause tension. But what's surprising is that almost all researchers describe the same pressure, as if space were compressing. There are even more disturbing cases. One researcher noticed that the second shadow sometimes moved first. He stood motionless while the faint shadow seemed to sway slightly, as if from an invisible movement. At that moment, instruments showed a complete absence of wind, vibrations, or sources that could affect the surface. This gave rise to another hypothesis, that the second shadow might not be the result of light, but the reflection of motion in space, which operates according to different laws. There is evidence that the double shadow effect appears only on certain days of the year. In between, it disappears completely, as if the island goes silent. Some attribute this to the sun's position, others to unknown atmospheric cycles. But what's important is that the phenomenon is extremely persistent. It recurs for decades regardless of weather, humidity, and seasonal changes. There's a striking coincidence among the old legends of the local tribes. They said the island has two suns. This is, of course, a metaphor, but the legends describe seeing a double light over the island at night when there's nothing in the sky. Perhaps this is a mythologizing of the phenomenon, or perhaps it's an indication that shadows don't only appear during the day. Some travelers claim to have seen double shadows even on moonlit nights. This seems almost impossible. The moonlight is too weak. But like many tales of rare phenomena, these stories are vague and poorly corroborated. The most frightening observation occurred to an expedition member who entered the Circle of Shadows late in the afternoon. He noticed that his second shadow had grown longer than the first and was receding toward the forest. He tried to get closer, but the shadow retreated further and further. For a moment, it seemed to him that the shadow had moved behind the trees as if diverting his gaze. When he took a step, the shadow disappeared. He said that at that moment he felt a chill, as if the temperature around him had suddenly dropped. Some scientists believe the phenomenon may be related to a rare form of light interference, the multi-layered splitting of light beams by invisible air structures. But no calculations have yet confirmed this idea. The effect is too directional, too consistent, too meaningful. It seems to take into account the observer's position, their movement, their steps. Others believe it's related to the island's deep geological properties. Perhaps there are layers of rock beneath the surface that reflect or absorb light in unusual ways. But then why do the shadows change as the person moves? And why do they diverge as if they belong to two different figures? There's also a mystical theory. Some say the second shadow is a human echo, an imprint of what was or will be. Of course, science rejects such explanations, but what's surprising is that these shadows were spoken of long before the first researchers. The island with two shadows remains one of the region's most inscrutable mysteries. It's not a trick of the light, not an illusion, not a perceptual error. It's a persistent phenomenon that operates according to its own rules, which don't correspond to any known pattern. And everyone who has seen their second shadow says the same thing. At that moment, it feels like you're standing not only in your own world, but also on the edge of another, one that momentarily reveals its reflection. Steppes of Egypt, deep beneath the sands of western Egypt, where even caravans rarely pass, researchers have discovered strange stone formations resembling steppes. They are hidden beneath a meter-thick layer of sand and are revealed only after powerful sandstorms, when the wind sweeps away the surface, revealing fragments of ancient structures. These steppes are unlike any known type of ancient Egyptian architecture. They are too narrow, too deep, and lead not upward, but downward, into the sand, which each time completely buries them. The first evidence emerged at the end of the last century, when a group of geologists stumbled upon a smooth rock outcrop protruding from beneath a dune. It looked like the edge of a huge slab. When the researchers cleared away a few meters of sand, a wide stone platform was revealed, leading to steps descending into the depths. But further progress was impossible. the steps disappeared beneath a dense layer of sand. An attempt to excavate the passage failed. The sand instantly crumbled, as if someone had deliberately blocked the entrance. Most impressive of all was the quality of the stonework. The steps were perfectly smooth, of uniform depth and width. The edges were sharp, as if they had been cut with incredible precision. Fine lines were visible on the surface of the steps, not ritual patterns or inscriptions, but marks reminiscent of mechanical cutting. But the ancient Egyptians didn't possess tools capable of leaving such marks. Even modern machines rarely produce such clean lines on stone of such density. Some researchers have suggested that the steps may have been the entrance to an ancient tomb or underground complex. Egypt is famous for its secret chambers and hidden structures. But there's a key difference. All known underground complexes are located closer to the Nile, in areas with stable soil. Here, however, the sand is loose, which would prevent an underground structure from preserving for thousands of years. And yet the steps look as if they were carved yesterday. There's another oddity, the orientation. The steps point strictly west. In ancient Egypt, the west was associated with the underworld. Could this have been part of a ritual complex? Perhaps. But then why is there not a single symbol, not a single inscription, not a single indication that this was created by human hand? Just smooth stone, cold and incomprehensible. One report mentions a fragment of stone found near the steps with a perfectly round hole. The hole was approximately 1 centimeter in diameter. It penetrated the stone slab at a perfect angle without deviating even a millimeter. This level of precision is difficult to explain even with modern technology, but the fragment lay deep beneath the sand, where no one would have disturbed it for centuries. Some researchers speculate that the steps may have been part of a much larger structure, long hidden beneath the desert. Perhaps this was a complex similar to the underground cities in Sinai or Nubia. But even then, the quality of the stonework remains inexplicable. Sandy Egypt lacks the type of rock that would maintain sharp edges for so long. The wind should have smoothed everything out. But the steps are sharp, as if the sand hadn't touched them. There are even stranger observations. Several times after a night when the steps were opened by a storm, researchers heard a faint, low sound deep within. It resembled a deep hum or vibration. The sound lasted for a few seconds, then disappeared. The instruments detected nothing, no vibrations, no change in pressure. But the people heard it clearly, although they couldn't determine its source. One of the researchers described a strange sensation similar to a slight pressure on his ears when he stood on the top step. It was as if the air were becoming denser. This sensation disappeared as soon as he stepped back into the sand. Such pressure could indicate a hidden cavity beneath the steps. However, radars used later showed only a dense layer of sand, no voids or caverns. Perhaps the steps lead to a cavity filled with sand so densely that it doesn't reflect the instrument's signals. But how then can the hum be explained, or the unusual air density? These effects don't just happen, they require movement, energy, or structures capable of resonating. But nothing can explain them so far. Locals have a legend about the sand staircase. They say the staircase leads to a place where there is no wind. This place isn't called the realm of the dead, rather it's described as silence underground. People believed it was the entrance to the spirit world, and that one day the staircase would fully open, but only to those who came alone. There were even stories of the steps sometimes changing depth beneath the sand. On one expedition, which returned after a several-year hiatus, researchers noticed that there were now more steps. Not 13 as before, but 16. Of course, this could be explained by the wind removing more sand. But scientists insisted, previously, there was no hint of a continuation beneath the sand. It seemed as if the steps were growing or revealing over time. There's a theory that beneath the sands lie the remains of ancient structures built by an unknown civilization predating the Egyptians. This theory is often voiced by proponents of alternative history. But even if we accept it, a key question remains. How could people living thousands of years ago have created steps with such precision? Some researchers believe the steps are simply an unusual geological phenomenon. But there are too many coincidences: perfect symmetry, a westward orientation, smooth surfaces, cuts, and holes. None of this seems like a natural accident. Sand erosion doesn't create steps. It smooths, destroys, and turns rock into dust. But here we see a structure that has withstood the sand for centuries. The most mystical hypothesis is that the steps may be part of a mechanism, not in the modern sense, but in the ancient one, where mechanics and architecture were one. Perhaps the steps are just the outer layer of a vast underground system. But if so, where is the entrance? Where are the walls? Where is anything other than steps? The steppes of Egypt remain one of the desert's most intriguing mysteries. They appear and disappear with the wind. They seem to beckon downwards, but refuse to let you in. They are clearly carved, but their origin remains unknown. Geology, archaeology, physics, all disciplines find something in them that defies the familiar. And when a person stands on the top step, with hard stone beneath their feet, endless sand all around, and a deep silence in their ears, they understand. Whatever it is, hidden beneath the desert is a story that the sand refuses to fully reveal. Only a hint, only steps leading to where perhaps no one has ever been before. Stone Disk of Harras. In a remote region of Central Asia, among sun-baked plateaus and rocky outcrops, researchers discovered an object now known as the Khoras Disk. It's a round slab of unusually dense stone, approximately 3 meters in diameter, perfectly smooth and thin at the edges, as if chiseled with mathematical precision. But the strangest thing is that it doesn't lie flat on the ground. The disk stands upright, like a giant stone hoop pressed into the soil. This disk was first discovered by shepherds. It was half protruding from the ground, as if someone had once tried to bury it but failed. The shepherds called geologists, certain they had discovered an unusual geological formation. But when the researchers cleared the surrounding soil, they realized it was not a natural formation. It was a monolith, carved so precisely that even modern tools would have difficulty replicating its geometry. The surface of the disk is smooth but not polished. It bears fine concentric grooves as if created by a machine or some kind of rotary tool. But these grooves are too uniform, running in straight lines from the center to the edge, and each groove is of equal depth. It appears as if the disk was made on a huge stone lathe, a technology that never existed in the region. The most surprising thing is the cavity in the center. It's not round, as one might expect. It's oval, elongated, and slightly offset. The interior walls of the cavity are smooth, with no signs of processing. Scientists speculate that this cavity may have once contained an insert made of another material. But what kind? And for what purpose? When the disk was first freed from the ground, something happened that the researchers couldn't explain. Beneath it, a small depression was discovered, perfectly round, smooth, and about a foot deep. At the bottom of the depression lay a thin strip of black material reminiscent of slate. But when they attempted to lift this material, it crumbled to dust at the slightest touch, as if it were incredibly old or had been eroded by time. However, the shape of the material suggested that it might have been part of a structure that once stood within the disk. Some believe the disk may have been part of an ancient astronomical instrument. Its shape, smoothness, and placement suggest it served as some sort of enormous clock face. But that raises the question, why is it vertical? And why are there no markings other than the internal grooves? And if it truly was an instrument, what did it measure? The disk has another peculiarity, a faint resonance. If you lightly strike the edge of the stone, it produces a low, drawn-out sound, similar to the hum of a metal gong. But the disk is made of stone. Stone shouldn't resonate so long and so evenly. Geologists attribute this to the rock's unique structure, similar to dense basalt. but even basalt doesn't produce such a pure, sustained sound. Some researchers believe the disk was created with its acoustic properties in mind. There are reports of the sound varying in strength at different points around the disk. At a distance of several steps, it becomes quieter. In other places, it increases in intensity. This suggests that the ground beneath the disk is not uniform. Perhaps there is a cavity or another layer of rock beneath the surface. Attempts to scan the soil have shown that there is indeed something dense beneath the disk, but the instruments cannot determine the shape of the object. There's an old legend among locals about a stone that talks at night. People claim that a low hum can sometimes be heard in the area around the disk, even like the breathing of the earth. On clear nights, the sound seems to come from within the stone. Of course, this could be a normal phenomenon, wind blowing through crevices. But the disk sits on level ground, and there are no rocks nearby that could create such an effect. The strangest phenomenon was observed several years ago when a group of students were taking temperature measurements. One evening, they noticed the disk's surface had become slightly warmer, even though the air had suddenly cooled. It didn't last long, but was recorded by the instruments. The heat emanated from the disk's central region, as if something inside had momentarily activated. Some scientists believe the disk may be part of an ancient orientation system. It may have served as a marker indicating the location of underground structures. However, no other objects were found nearby. The surrounding rocky soil is bare, empty, and bears no traces of ancient structures. There is, however, an interesting geophysical effect. Magnetic instruments show a slight but constant deviation of the needle within a few meters of the disk. It's so insignificant that a regular compass wouldn't notice the change. But sensitive instruments detect the anomaly. It's not related to magnetic rock. There's none in the region. But the disk somehow influences the field. The surface of the disk also has thin white veins. They look like traces of old cracks, but upon closer inspection, they turn out to be inclusions of another mineral. The veins run in a spiral, repeating the shape of the furrows. It seems as if additional elements were embedded in the stone, creating a specific vibration. Is this possible? No one knows. Another mystery is the surroundings. The ground around the disk is strange. It's softer than the rest of the plateau. In some places, a person could sink several centimeters. This leads some researchers to speculate that the disk once rotated. If the disk structure were part of a mechanism, the movement could have compacted or loosened the soil. There are reports of a light haze appearing around the disk early in the morning. It doesn't resemble fog, but rather a thin layer of air that trembles, like a haze over a road. This may be due to temperature differences, but the haze appears even on cool days. Some believe it's due to vibrations in the stone structure. An ancient Tibetan text found far from these places mentions a round stone that cannot be lifted but can be heard. This coincidence is often cited by proponents of mystical theories. They believe that similar disks could have been part of a larger network of objects across Asia. But there is no evidence for this, only vague hints and similarities in shape. As for scientific attempts to explain the harassed disk, they have so far reached a dead end. Geology offers no answers, nor does archaeology. The shape is too perfect, the function is incomprehensible, the properties are strange. It's not just an artifact, it's an object that seems to be waiting to be understood. But no one has yet been able to understand it. And when a person stands before this stone circle, tall, even heavy, they sense more than just antiquity. They sense precision, as if before them stands a mechanism stopped for millennia. And if it were to be activated, it would hum, move, glow, or open a path deep into the earth. But for now, the disk stands silent, and only the wind occasionally echoes its hum, as if trying to remind them that there is something within the stone that has not yet awakened. Traces of Patagonia? In southern Patagonia, amidst endless windswept plains where the land seems empty and silent, researchers have discovered traces of a vanished settlement. It is unlike any known settlement in the region. There are no remains of walls, no charred trees, no ruins, no household items. Only footprints remain, strange, deep, as if carved into the earth by immense force. They follow precise lines, form rectangular contours, stretch into the distance, and disappear beneath a layer of pebbles. The first thing that surprised the researchers was their absolute symmetry. The tracks look as if someone had carved the earth with a chisel. They are the same width, the same depth, and the edges are smooth and clean. They appear to be the foundations of buildings, but there was never any stone here, only dense, compacted earth and pebbles. Some contours appear to be the bases of large rectangular structures, while others form narrow corridors, like passages between houses. But if this really was a settlement, where are its remains? Any human construction leaves behind at least something: debris, charcoal, pottery fragments, metal elements. But here, nothing, not a single recovered object. Only cuts in the ground that bear no connection to the activities of the known Patagonian tribes. When researchers tried to determine the age of the tracks, they encountered a problem. The ground around the edges was stable, not crumbling or eroding, as if the tracks were fresh. But the surrounding vegetation, mosses, lichens, tiny bushes, revealed that the marks were much older than they appeared. These plants grow slowly, some taking decades. This meant the tracks had existed for a long time. The strangest thing is that the footprints don't resemble foundations in the conventional sense. They are too deep, sometimes reaching up to 1 meter. If they were foundations, enormous structures would have stood here. But the region is resource poor, and no signs of a developed civilization have been found here. However, the structure of the footprints is too deliberate to be random. There are areas where the footprints take on complex shapes, semicircles, intersections, right angles, that look not just neat, but geometrically perfect. Such symmetry is not found in natural processes. Wind blows holes chaotically. Water creates channels. But here, there's an architectural logic. Some researchers have noticed that the tracks are oriented in a uniform manner directly southwest. This already resembles a system, a guide, an orientation. But why? What could this be related to? The wind? The sun? Or something that was once on the horizon? One of the most puzzling aspects is the thermal contrast. Satellite images show that the areas where the footprints are located are cooler than the rest of the ground. This may be due to the soil, but why did it change in these particular areas? Perhaps something was there that absorbed the Earth's heat. Buildings, shadows, large stone slabs. But if so, where are they? There are reports of a faint metallic sound sometimes heard when walking along the contour's edges. The sound resembles a thin ringing sound, as if a small metal ball were striking the ground. However, there is no metal underground. It may simply be the sound of stones rubbing together, but it repeats too regularly. Some researchers are certain the sound originates from deep within, as if a stone slab or empty cavity were hidden beneath a layer of pebbles. One geologist suggested that the marks weren't the foundations of buildings, but rather the sites of enormous wooden structures so old that nothing remained of them. But then, the marks wouldn't have been so smooth. Wood shifts and distorts the soil over time, but here the edges are perfectly straight. It has been suggested that the traces may have been part of an ancient water or food storage system. However, the depth and shape are inconsistent with known methods. Furthermore, there are no signs of cultivation, typical of trenches or storage facilities. Some believe the tracks are the remains of an ancient road or road system. However, the width of the contours is too small for a road and too wide for a pedestrian path. Furthermore, the intersections form right angles, uncharacteristic of ancient road systems. The strangest section is the so-called quadrangle. It's a huge outline, almost 10 by 10 meters, with angles perfect to the centimeter. But most importantly, in the center is a small depression, lined with small stones. These stones differ from the surrounding pebbles. They're smooth and lighter in color, as if they'd been deliberately brought here from elsewhere. But why? What function did this depression serve? There are also traces that disappear into nothingness, smooth, deep lines that end in nothingness. It's as if the structure that was meant to endure has vanished, or was never completed, or was made of a material that has completely dissolved over time. Some expedition members claim to have heard faint sounds in these areas at night, like footsteps on fragile gravel. But there was no one nearby. Wind can create such illusions, but on these nights, the wind was light. The footsteps were rhythmic, as if someone were walking along the contours. There are cases where researchers complained of a feeling of pressure in their temples when standing inside large rectangular contours. It was as if the air inside was denser than the outside. This sensation disappeared when they stepped outside the contours. The instruments didn't record the pressure difference, but people felt it. There's an old legend among locals about people who can't be seen. The legend tells of a settlement that disappeared due to a strong wind or light from the sky. People believe the traces are the remains of that settlement, but the legends in these parts are so ancient and confusing that it's difficult to determine what's fiction and what's an allusion to a real event. Some geologists believe the tracks could have been created by natural processes, sudden climate change, shifting ice, or the influence of groundwater. But then why do they form such perfect geometric shapes? And why do they repeat over a large area? One of the most intriguing observations is the strange soil samples found within several of the contours. They contain unusual concentrations of minerals not found in the surrounding soil. This may indicate that a material different from the local one was located here. Perhaps construction material, perhaps ritualistic, perhaps unknown. The Patagonian trails remain a mystery, difficult to explain. They are surprisingly smooth, deep, and logical, and yet empty. They look like the traces of a civilization that never existed in history, or like the remnants of something that vanished too long ago to be remembered. When a person stands in the center of the quadrangle, surrounded by straight lines and an endless sky above, they feel something strange. As if the place remembers something no one else does. As if something greater is hidden beneath the earth. Silence, form, structure. And only the wind knows why nothing remains of everything else but traces. Larimore Lighthouse. Off the coast of Larimore, where fog hangs so thick over the water that even the silhouettes of ships are obscured, stands an old lighthouse. It's called Orphaned, not because it's abandoned, but because it once belonged to a complex of buildings and structures that mysteriously vanished. All that remains is the lighthouse, lonely, surrounded by empty land, where there are no traces of foundations, no remains of structures, no signs of human activity. Old nautical charts mention a small village at the foot of the lighthouse. Keepers, fishermen, and their families lived here. The maps depict houses, a pier, warehouses, even a small market. But when archaeologists arrived at the site many years later, they found nothing. Not a single beam, not a splinter of wood, not a shard of pottery. Only the lighthouse, tall and gloomy, standing on a rocky outcrop, as if watching over the sea. The first thing that strikes one is the lighthouse's condition. It's so well preserved. Its stone blocks are virtually untouched by time. The stones it's composed of don't match the rocks found in the surrounding area. They're dense, smooth, and light-colored, as if they were brought from far away or created artificially. But no one knows where they came from, as the nearest suitable quarries are hundreds of kilometers away. When the lighthouse's internal structure was first examined, it was discovered that the walls were too thick, much thicker than was required for typical lighthouses of the time. Some sections of the stone appear to have been cast rather than carved. However, there are no traces of molds, seams, or fills. The surface is uniform and seamless, as if the lighthouse had grown out of the rock rather than been constructed. There is also something odd about the interior staircase. It's an unusual shape. The steps are slightly deeper than usual, and the flights themselves are angled more acutely than in other lighthouses in the region. The staircase ascends to the top of the lighthouse without a single unevenness. It looks as if it were carved with a single stroke of a tool, leaving the stone perfectly smooth. There are no signs of handwork on the walls, no scratches, no chips, nothing. Lighthouses in those parts were built like this. But the biggest mystery is the village's disappearance. Even if the houses were wooden, they should have left behind pits containing posts, charred remains of fireplaces, fragments of pottery, and metal objects. But the land around the lighthouse is empty. Even the ground seems strangely flat, as if it had been leveled, not in recent decades but long ago, and no one had touched it since. One explorer described the place this way: "It's as if someone had wiped away everything around the lighthouse with a sudden movement, leaving only the stone tower, like a spire jutting out of the void." This feeling is felt by many who visit. The lighthouse stands in its place, but it seems superfluous, as if it's a witness to something that no longer exists. There are accounts by old sailors of nights when the lighthouse shone too brightly. Old diaries mention that its light pierced the fog like a knife. Even in the days when the equipment was simple, the lighthouse's beam was so intense that it could be seen for miles. This is strange, as the lamps of that time couldn't produce such intensity. Some sailors said the light wasn't the usual golden one, but cold and white, as if another source emanated from within the tower. Today, the lighthouse is equipped with modern equipment, but researchers claim there are voids in the old masonry that echo when tapped. These voids don't show up in scans, as if the sound isn't reflecting from the actual cavities, but rather traveling through the stone differently. One acoustician said he felt the sound in the lighthouse, fading in the wrong direction, as if the stone were absorbing it. There's another observation. On certain days, especially during thick fog, a faint odor appears inside the lighthouse. Damp, cold, similar to the smell of old ship holds. But on these days, the surrounding land is dry, the sea air is calm, and nothing suggests such a smell. It appears only inside the lighthouse, disappearing as suddenly as it appeared. Some explorers who spent the night inside reported strange sounds. It sounded like someone was walking on the stairs, but never going higher or lower than one flight. The footsteps were soft and leisurely. One person once described it as footsteps walking as if right next to me, but there was no one on the stairs. Such sounds are easily explained by the wind, but wind can't create consistent footsteps at the same intervals. There are also strange occurrences around the lighthouse. Compasses within a 50-meter radius deviate slightly. Not much, just a few degrees, but enough for navigators to notice. This may be due to magnetic rock, but the rocks in the region aren't magnetic. Some researchers believe it's due to the lighthouse's stone blocks themselves. But why, then, are these stones free of magnetic inclusions? There's a report that one night during a foggy spell, the lighthouse's beam disappeared for a few seconds. When it returned, it was pointed slightly off-center. The mechanism was checked the next morning. It was in perfect working order. Some thought the keeper had turned the light, but no one was inside that night, and no one could explain why the lighthouse had suddenly changed direction. There are also strange marks at the base of the lighthouse. They're small and round, as if someone had been placing cylindrical objects in a consistent pattern. They're arranged in a circle, echoing the shape of the lighthouse, but too precisely aligned to be random. Perhaps these are the remains of machinery? But no metal objects have been found here. There's an old legend circulating among the locals. It says that a light once fell on the coast of Larimore. This event is described as the appearance of a white glow that enveloped the land and then vanished. Afterward, houses, people, and boats supposedly vanished. Only the lighthouse remained, an axis of light frozen in the world. Of course, this is just a legend, but the strange coincidence is that the description of the light is similar to sailors' accounts of the lighthouse's unusual light. There's a theory that the lighthouse may have been part of a device that regulated or amplified light. Perhaps there were stations, mirrors, and fortifications around it, all washed away by a storm or eroded by time. But even so, the wood and metal should have survived at least partially. The earth preserves debris for centuries. But here, there's silence. Researchers are certain that whatever happened in Larimore, it happened quickly. There are no signs of destruction. Nothing was dismantled by hand. Everything seems to have vanished instantly and without a trace. The lighthouse, however, remains, a point around which something happened that erased everything else. And everyone who climbs to the top of the lighthouse tells the same story. When you look out to sea through the thick fog, it seems as if the fog is responding. It moves against the wind, gathering at the base of the tower, as if listening. And for a moment, just a second, you can catch a faint glow, cold, white, in the depths of the fog. A glow that belongs neither to the sun nor to the moon. The radiance of Parana. In the dense forests of Paraná, where the nights seem to swallow up the light and the humid air obscures any movement, there exists a phenomenon the locals call forest aurora. It's not lights, not lightning, not fireflies. It's a soft, steady glow that appears deep in the forest for a few seconds, as if someone were lighting a huge lantern, invisible from the outside. It doesn't flicker, doesn't move. It simply appears and disappears, leaving behind silence and a strange sense that the forest was trying to say something. The first mentions of the aurora appeared long ago. Tribal elders in Paraná spoke of nights when leaves began to glow, not from the moon, but from an inner light. People thought it was spirits, children were afraid, and adults avoided going deep into the forest. But when explorers first witnessed the aurora with their own eyes, it became clear. This was no legend. It was a phenomenon that could be observed, but never fully documented. The aurora typically appears in the darkest hours of the night, when there's no moon or stars, when humidity is at its highest. It manifests between the trees, filling the space with an even green-white light. It's not harsh or mindless, but rather soft and alive. At such moments, the forest seems to become more three-dimensional, more tangible. But take a step, and the light disappears. Researchers attempted to record the aurora. Cameras recorded only a slight increase in brightness, conveying neither the hue nor the structure of the light. Audio recordings revealed only the rustling of the forest. Instruments showed no electromagnetic emissions, magnetic anomalies, or temperature fluctuations. It was as if the aurora existed only for the eye, not for technology. As if the phenomenon somehow eluded the instruments, but not the human senses. What's odd is that the glow always appears at the same level, roughly human height. It doesn't appear at the ground or rise into the canopy. It seems to choose its height, remaining at eye level. Some believe this is an optical effect. The light reflects off the moist air. But if it were a reflection, then viewing angle would matter. The glow is visible equally, even if the observer is standing to the side. There are also more disturbing observations. Several researchers over the years claim to see outlines for a second at the heart of the aurora. Vague, like shadows. Not human figures, but something elongated. Some said it was the silhouette of a tree, others that the light seemed to skirt around the figure, not illuminating it. But each time the light faded, there was nothing around. Some scientists have suggested that the glow may be caused by plant luminescence. Tropical rainforests may indeed contain fungi, lichens, and microorganisms capable of emitting light. However, the glow appears in areas where such organisms are absent. Furthermore, the brightness is too intense for natural bioluminescence. It illuminates an area of several meters around. There's another difficulty. The aurora never appears in the same place twice. It always appears in new spots, among the trees, at the edge of a forest, in a hollow. There's no pattern. But locals know, if the aurora appears in one part of the forest overnight, The next morning, you can find unusual marks on the leaves in that same spot, as if someone had stroked them. The surface becomes smoother than usual, as if the leaves had been subjected to heat or pressure. Some researchers have noticed that before the aurora appears, the air becomes quieter. Even insects stop making sounds. This effect has been described by various people. The forest falls silent. The silence lasts for a few seconds, and then the light appears. Afterward, silence returns, as if the forest has come to its senses. In one case, a group of scientists recorded strange fluctuations in humidity. A second before the light appeared, the air became slightly drier, literally by a fraction of a percent. And after it disappeared, the humidity returned. This cycle repeated 3 times in one night. But what could have instantly sucked the moisture out of the air remains unclear. Attempts were made to approach the light source, but as soon as one took a step, the glow disappeared. Perhaps it was the vibrations in the ground from one's footsteps. Perhaps it was a change in the air. But some claimed the light disappeared just before they took a step, as if the phenomenon knew that one was about to approach. There's a legend that the aurora appears where the earth breathes. Elders said that in Paraná there are places where natural voids run underground, and that the light is an echo of these cavities. However, geology doesn't confirm the presence of large voids. The earth is dense, layered, with no signs of large caverns. One report describes how, after the aurora appeared, trees in one area seemed to lean slightly. Not much, just a couple of centimeters, but the tilt was uniform, pointing toward the vanished light. After a few days, the tilt disappeared. This is difficult to explain. Trees are too heavy to react to short-term changes in the air. Some researchers jokingly call this phenomenon reflected light from an unknown source. But if there really is a source, it must be located above the tree line or within them. However, no satellites have detected any light emissions over Paraná. There were no atmospheric anomalies. Everything points to the light source being located within the forest itself, but no one knows what it is. There's a myth that the aurora is the eye of the forest, that the forest is watching people. And as strange as it may sound, many who have witnessed the phenomenon admit, when the light appears, you get the feeling that someone is looking right at you. Not threatening, not hostile, just watching, calmly, intently. Modern expeditions continue to study the aurora, but the more data they collect, the less they understand. The light leaves no trace. It produces no heat. It doesn't change the chemical composition of the air. It isn't recorded by instruments. But it's there. Dozens of people see it. It exists in a very specific form, like a phenomenon living by its own laws. The Paraná glow reminds us that even in a world where everything seems explored, phenomena remain that transcend the known. It's like the quiet breath of the forest, soft, cautious. And every time the light flashes between the trees, for a second it becomes clear. Nature still holds secrets it never reveals to anyone. It only reveals them, and then retreats back into the darkness. Traceless slabs. In one of the most inaccessible regions of North Africa, where rocky plateaus stretch to the horizon, lies a place researchers call the Valley of the Traceless Slabs. The name is no accident. Dozens of large stone slabs lie here, each appearing to have been cut and moved with incredible precision. But there are no quarries, tool marks, or transport routes nearby. The slabs simply lie there, flat, heavy, unmovable, and yet they leave no visible trace of their movement on the ground. Each slab weighs several tons. They are uniform in thickness and shape, rectangular, slightly elongated. The surface of most slabs is perfectly smooth, as if polished. Some have fine longitudinal grooves, as if they were processed. But most importantly, they are not laid out randomly. Their arrangement creates the impression of geometric order. Some slabs form long lines, others are neat rectangular groups. This is not natural chaos. This is clearly someone's work. But the strangest part is the lack of traces. If the slabs had been moved thousands of years ago, there would have been gouges, skid marks, and soil deformations beneath them. If they had been moved recently, there would have been traces of machinery. But the ground around the slabs is completely flat. It's as if the slabs fell from above, gently, without impact, without destruction. No soil analysis has shown evidence of the impact of enormous pressure. Initially, researchers assumed the slabs might have been part of an ancient structure, a temple, a fortress, or a large stone complex. But there's not a single vertical structure nearby. No columns, no walls, no remains of buildings. Only slabs scattered on the ground. If it was a complex, it has disappeared completely, as if it was dismantled or sank into the ground, leaving only the foundation elements. Some slabs have strange depressions, shallow, round, a few centimeters in diameter. They are arranged strictly symmetrically and resemble mounting points for mechanisms or fasteners. But there are no metal remains. Perhaps the depressions serve to install wooden supports. But if so, why didn't the wood leave any traces? Wood can rot, but it doesn't disappear completely. At least a dark line in the soil always remains. But here, there's nothing. There's a hypothesis that the slabs are a geological phenomenon, natural fractures left by erosion. But natural slabs never form with such precision. Their edges are always jagged, their surfaces rough. Here, however, there are perfectly straight lines. Moreover, the geology of the region doesn't predict the existence of this type of rock in the required form. The slabs look as if they were created artificially. But by whom? And why? The most intriguing section is where the slabs form a figure resembling a giant rectangle divided into equal segments. Within the segments, the soil appears denser. Some researchers have suggested that these are the remains of an ancient floor. But if so, where are the walls? Where are the columns? Where is anything other than smooth slabs carefully left in the desert? There are indications of unusual properties of the slabs. When walking on them, you can notice a faint ringing sound, as if the slab is vibrating slightly. This sensation is elusive. The sound is so faint that it can be mistaken for your own footsteps. But several people on different expeditions have described the same thing. Some slabs respond to steps, while others are completely silent. This has led to the hypothesis that there may be a hidden cavity or system of voids underground. However, radar surveys have found no voids beneath the slabs, only a dense rock layer. One of the most puzzling details is the polished edges of the slabs. They're not just smooth, but seem slightly rounded, as if the slabs had been moved and turned repeatedly. But who could have moved such massive blocks? If humans did, they should have left traces. If it's a natural phenomenon, how can they explain the rounded shape, which appears more the result of processing than erosion? There are other oddities, too. In some places, whitish marks are visible on the slabs, reminiscent of intense heating. They are arranged in patches, as if the slab had been heated in several places simultaneously. However, the surrounding ground is not scorched. These marks could have been caused by lightning strikes, but the shape is inconsistent. Furthermore, lightning doesn't strike precisely in the center of each slab. Some locals tell a legend about stone leaves that once fell from the sky. The legends say these leaves fell quietly, without noise, and didn't crush anyone because they were alive. These are metaphors, of course, but it's noteworthy that the legends specifically mention the absence of traces of fall, just like the slabs. Despite the lack of evidence, one expedition suggested the slabs could have been part of an ancient mechanism, perhaps a platform or a map. The arrangement of some of the slabs is too precise to be random. But if it is a mechanism, all the working parts have disappeared. They may have been made of wood or metal, which has disintegrated. But again, there are no traces. There's also a theory that the slabs may have served as a sanctuary where rituals were performed. The flat surfaces could have been used to place objects. But this theory also raises questions. Why are there no traces of fire, ash, pottery, or any ritual objects? The ground is empty, as if the slabs were lying in a place never touched by culture. Scientists note another oddity. The plates shift slightly from time to time. This can be seen by comparing old and new satellite images. The shift is minimal, literally a few millimeters, but the plates are too heavy to be moved by wind, animals, or minor ground movements. And they don't shift randomly, sometimes in groups, as if something is changing beneath them. There's a report that one night, a group of researchers saw a faint bluish glow emanating from several slabs. This glow lasted for a few seconds, then disappeared. The slabs were examined in the morning. No traces of heat, electricity, minerals, or luminescence were found. However, the observation was recorded by several people simultaneously. The traceless slabs remain one of those mysteries where the more data you gather, the less you understand. There's nothing here, but that nothing makes too much sense. Too much geometry, too much precision, too little explanation. The slabs seem to hint they are part of something larger. They are the remains of a structure that was once important, or a mechanism disconnected and fragmented, or a fragment of architecture that has lost its body but retained its foundation. And when a person walks across the stone slabs in the silence of a desert plateau, he understands. The absence of footprints is also a trace of something that once vanished, leaving nothing but perfectly smooth sheets of stone lying under the open sky. City of Burma, deep in the Burmese jungle, where humidity hangs in the air like fog and trails disappear into the undergrowth just hours after rain. There's a legend of a city that was found and then lost again. It's known simply as the city that lingers in memory. The name comes not from mysticism, but from a strange story. Several expeditions at different times claim to have found ancient structures, only to return again and find nothing. The first documented mention comes from a traveler in the middle of the last century who described stone structures in the jungle. He spoke of high walls covered in carvings, steps leading to ruined halls, and stone slabs with indentations resembling symbols. But a year later, this traveler attempted to return and couldn't find even a trace. No walls, no steps, no slabs, only damp earth and thickets. Decades later, another group of researchers reported roughly the same thing. They found rectangular stone blocks, carefully stacked on top of each other, fragments of columns, stone corridors leading in various directions. They made sketches, photographs, and descriptions. But when they brought the next group back here a few months later, the place looked different. The stones were gone. The terrain was flat. All the geometry the researchers had described seemed to have dissolved into the earth. Of course, skeptics say it's easy to make mistakes in the jungle. Vegetation grows quickly, paths shift, and the eye struggles to discern structure. But the strange thing is that it's not the paths that disappear. It's the stones. Blocks weighing hundreds of kilograms disappear. Columns that couldn't be carried off unnoticed disappear. And entire sections of terrain that, in theory, should have remained unchanged for centuries disappear. There's a theory that the structures were made of limestone, which quickly erodes under the influence of acid rain. But descriptions point to a hard stone, similar to granite. And granite doesn't disappear in weeks or months, and it certainly doesn't vanish without a trace. It doesn't turn into soil. It doesn't dissolve without leaving a trace. Some researchers believe the city may lie on the boundary of two tectonic plates, and that certain processes could cause stone blocks to sink underground. But this is unlikely. For massive structures to collapse, years of change and destruction are required. And according to the stories, the changes occurred too quickly. There's another oddity: magnetic anomalies. Several expeditions have reported that compasses near the supposed site of the city are becoming erratic. The needle shifts a few degrees, then returns. Sometimes it begins to tremble slightly. Instruments detect small fluctuations, but the source of the anomaly cannot be found. There are no magnetic inclusions in the rock, no metals nearby, and trees cannot cause such effects. Some explorers who spent the night near the supposed city reported hearing sounds. They weren't sounds of animals or the usual rustling jungle. They were low, muffled sounds like distant thumps or vibrations. The sounds were rhythmic, repeated at intervals. But no one could connect them to natural phenomena. Wind couldn't create them. No animals make such noises. The sounds seemed to come from underground. One report mentions a strange lighting effect. Researchers reported that at night the air around the stone blocks, visible at the time, seemed to glow slightly. It wasn't bright, not distinct, more like a subtle glow from fog. It lasted for a few seconds and then disappeared. By morning, the stones were gone. Some scientists believe the city does exist, but is located in an area where the soil is unstable. Perhaps there are voids underground, and stone blocks sometimes collapse, with the soil quickly filling the resulting space. But then, by morning, the ground should have collapsed, leaving holes and cracks. Nothing of the sort has been found in the jungle. There's also a theory that the city may be scattered across a large area. Fragments that sometimes appear, sometimes are hidden by the forest. But the logic behind the arrangement of the described objects is too coherent. People saw walls connected by corridors, and then empty space. Locals talk about a moving city. Legends say it doesn't stand on the ground, but floats in the leaves. It's a metaphor, but the legends contain a recurring detail. The city only reveals itself to those who arrive for the first time, and then it disappears. Perhaps this is a beautiful explanation for the strange phenomenon, or perhaps it's a hint that the city doesn't always appear. Despite the lack of research, there are several consistent observations. The stone blocks are always described as perfectly fitted together. The carvings on the walls resemble geometric patterns rather than traditional Burmese symbolism. Some blocks appear to be composed of layers of varying density. In rare cases, researchers have noticed a faint odor of the stone, a sharp mineral smell, as if freshly broken despite the ancient surface. There's a report where a researcher says that while standing near the wall, he felt a faint vibration, as if something was moving or pulsating distantly within the stone. The vibration lasted only a second and then disappeared. The next day, the wall was gone. Most expeditions agree on one thing. When a city exists, it looks old. Ruins, crumbling walls, the marks of time. But when it disappears, the jungle in its place looks as if nothing has happened for decades. Plants grow straight, the soil is undisturbed, the trees stand straight, as if no one had cleared the space for the stone or occupied it. The Burmese city remains one of the most difficult mysteries to explain. Perhaps it's a trick of perception. Perhaps it's a rare geological phenomenon. Perhaps it's an incomprehensible ancient structure, part of which is sinking underground faster than it appears. Or perhaps it's a phenomenon we can't yet describe in conventional terms. But everyone who has seen the city even once says the same thing. It exists. And when you stand among the stone walls, the forest around you seems to retreat. But turn away, and it returns, consuming everything it refuses to leave behind. Whispering Gorges. In Crimea, among ancient limestone ridges and deep rock crevices, there are several places locals call Whispering Gorges. These are narrow passages between sheer walls, sometimes so tight that a person can barely pass through. But it's precisely in these places that sounds can sometimes be heard that resemble neither the echo of footsteps nor the rustle of the wind. The sounds resemble a whisper, quiet, multi-layered, as if someone is speaking simultaneously from different points in space. The first thing a person notices upon entering the gorge is the sudden transition to silence. Everything can be heard outside: birds, wind, the rustling of leaves. But as soon as one enters the narrow passage, sounds seem to freeze in the air. Even one's own breathing sounds louder than usual. The walls of the gorge are smooth, as if polished by water, although the water has flowed here too long ago to have left such smooth surfaces. In some areas, the walls feel strangely cold, even on a warm day. Whispers aren't always audible. Sometimes everything is quiet. But sometimes just stopping is enough for the sound to appear. At first, it's light, like a wind brushing over stone. Then it becomes a little clearer. It resembles not just noise, but phrases that are impossible to understand. Different people hear different things. Some hear it as if someone is calling their name. Others hear it as if someone is talking about something nearby. Some hear short, abrupt phrases, but none of them make sense. Many have tried to record whispers, but the audio is just plain noise. No words, no rhythms. It's as if the whispers are only detectable by the human ear, or perhaps they're composed of frequencies that technology can't detect. One researcher said, "It's as if the whispers are happening inside your head, but you hear them all around you." Some parts of the gorge seem active. There, the walls converge slightly, creating a narrow space that acts as a resonator. But even a resonator should amplify real sounds. Here, you get the feeling of someone else's voice, soft, almost gentle. In some areas, the sound changes. It becomes lower, muffled, as if someone is speaking from the depths. But there is no depth there, only stone. The strangest thing is the direction of the sound. In normal acoustics, it's clear where the sound is coming from. But in the gorge, it seems to originate from above, below, and to the side simultaneously, as if the space is giving off different fragments of the same whisper. There's a story about a geologist who once heard a distinct "go there" in a gorge. He thought it was a colleague calling him, but the colleague was standing far outside and silent. And when the geologist came back out, the sound disappeared, as if it had never happened. Locals have long told a legend that voices live in the whispering gorges. According to legend, these aren't spirits or souls, but echoes of ancient events. It's as if the stone remembered the conversations of the people who once lived here and now repeats them. But if this is memory, why don't the sounds repeat? Why are they different every time? Some researchers believe the cause may be fine cracks within the rocks. When the wind passes through them at a certain angle, speech-like sounds are produced. But this theory is undermined by two facts. First, the whispers can be heard even on windless days. Second, no acoustic model can explain phrases heard simultaneously by different people, but in different ways. One researcher described how the whispering grew louder as he approached a particular niche in the wall. This niche was smooth and semicircular, as if hand-carved. Archaeologists insist this is a natural shape. However, it is precisely there that the most distinct sounds are often heard, as if something in the niche were echoing the footsteps. There are reports of vibrations. Several people claim to feel a slight tremor in the stone beneath their palms when the whispering grew louder. But the instruments don't detect anything. No seismic activity, no micro-vibrations, nothing. And yet, people feel it. Another strange observation is the change in temperature. Sometimes, just as the whispers begin, the air becomes colder, as if someone had passed by. The chill lasts for a moment and then disappears. It could have been a draft, but the gorges are too narrow, and there's too little air for it to change temperature so quickly. Some tourists have reported hearing a final distinct whisper behind them as they exited the gorge, as if a voice was seeing them off. This could be a figment of their imagination, but when dozens of people say the same thing at different times, the question remains, what's going on here? There are even more disturbing stories. One man claimed that, while at the narrowest point of the gorge, he heard footsteps behind him. He turned around. No one was there. The footsteps came again, closer. At that moment, the air seemed to thicken. He ran out and never re-entered the gorge. One of the most mysterious incidents involved a group of students. They heard a low whisper, like singing, inside a ravine. Monotonous even, drawn out. The singing continued for several seconds, then stopped. When the students tried to record the sound, the recording was blank, but the microphone simultaneously picked up strange, low-frequency spikes. They sounded like a series of pulses, but too weak to be a voice. Geologists have attempted to explain this by the properties of limestone. Perhaps it vibrates during sudden changes in humidity. But then the phenomenon should be constant. The whispers, however, only occur occasionally, as if following an unknown cycle. Some researchers suggest that the Whispering Gorges may be part of an ancient system, perhaps natural, perhaps architectural. It is hypothesized that these areas may have housed ritual sites in the past, where sound played an important role. However, there is no archaeological evidence to support this. Meanwhile, in one of the gorges, a strange straight cut was discovered in the rock, a perfectly straight line extending for several meters. Geologists say it could have been a pressure crack, but the line is too straight, as if it had been created intentionally. And it's precisely near this line that the sound becomes unusually deep, as if the rock were speaking from there. It's been suggested that whispers aren't sound, but a perceptual phenomenon. When a person is in a confined space, the brain can amplify internal noises. But then why do several people hear the sound simultaneously? Some scientists believe the cause may be a rare acoustic effect associated with the reflection of low-frequency waves. Perhaps the ground beneath the gorge contains cavities that create unique acoustics. However, the scans reveal a dense mass of rock. The Whispering Gorges remain one of the region's most enigmatic anomalies. They neither frighten nor threaten. Instead, they create a sense of presence, soft yet insistent. And anyone who has ever heard a whisper in stone agrees. The sounds seem too meaningful to be random, and too fleeting to be captured. Mongolia Hall. In the vast expanses of Mongolia, where the steppe seems endless and the wind blows dry grass to the horizon, there exists a place known only to a few shepherds. They call it simply the Hall. The word sounds strange in a world without walls, but once you get there, it becomes clear. The place truly resembles a vast hall, though there are no buildings there. Only stone walls, seemingly out of place in the steppe. The hall is located in an area where the ground suddenly forms a closed circle of sheer rock slabs. The slabs stand vertically, forming a perfect oval, so perfect that they seem artificial. Some slabs reach several meters in height. The surface is smooth, almost polished, as if they were deliberately leveled. But what's particularly strange is that there is no entrance. The slabs are so close together that it's impossible to pass between them. And yet, inside the circle is an empty space about 20 meters in diameter. It's perfectly flat, without cracks, stones, or grass. The soil there looks as if someone carefully leveled it. Standing nearby, you get the feeling that the ground inside the circle is slightly lower, as if the floor of the hall had actually been hollowed out or compacted. The explorers who first visited tried to figure out how to get inside, but there was no obvious passage. However, the shepherds knew the hall had an entrance that only appeared at certain times of day. It wasn't a doorway or a crack, it was a shadow. When the sun was low enough, a narrow strip appeared in one of the slabs, allowing passage. At other times, it was inoperative. The slab appeared solid. Scientists have attempted to explain this effect by a trick of the light. But even during the day, if you place your palm against the slabs, you can feel the difference. One of them is indeed slightly cooler, as if it has a cavity inside. However, instrumental measurements do not confirm the presence of voids. If the hall does have a hidden entrance, it is created not physically, but optically. An unusual silence reigns within the hall. Sound seems to vanish here. If a person speaks, they hear their own voice more muffled than usual. This doesn't resemble an echo or a lack of one. Rather, it seems like the sound is being absorbed. The slabs seem to drink up any sound without releasing it. This effect has been recorded repeatedly, but it remains unexplained. No known mineral in the region possesses this ability. The ground in the center of the hall is slightly warmer than at the edges. This is also surprising. There is no heat source. The area is open and sunlight illuminates it evenly. But the temperature consistently varies by 1 or 2 degrees. This is too much to be considered random. Perhaps there is something underground that accumulates heat, but the ground-penetrating radars show only dense rock. There's a barely noticeable crater on the surface of the hall's center, not a depression, but a round, smoothed area, slightly lighter than the rest. Some believe something was once installed here, a column, a statue, a device. But if so, there are no signs of fastenings, no holes, no scratches. Another peculiarity is the shadows. During the day, the shadows cast by the slabs fall within the circle in a peculiar way. They don't follow the shape of the slabs. They're shorter than they should be. It's as if the light falls differently. This observation was made by several expeditions, and each time photographers noticed the shadows in the hall behave according to their own laws. The strangest thing began when the researchers spent the first night inside. The air grew thicker at night. People said they felt as if someone was standing nearby. Not a noise, not a sound, just a sense of presence. One researcher woke up in the middle of the night, certain someone was walking around him. But when he turned on his flashlight, there was no one there, and no footprints were left on the ground. In another case, people heard a light tapping sound, rare, uniform, like the sound of stone hitting stone, coming from deep within the soil. Instruments recorded faint vibrations, but too insignificant to pinpoint the source. These vibrations repeated several times throughout the night and then disappeared. There are also visual anomalies. Several people saw a faint glow along the edge of the slabs. It was very thin, almost white. It lasted for a second, no more. We checked this morning. There was no luminescent material on the slabs, no chemical reaction either. Locals say the hall is the site of ancient rituals, but no artifacts have been found there, no charred fires, no figurines, no vessels. The ground is clean, as if regularly cleansed. Shepherds say the hall must not be disturbed, it's waiting. What exactly, no one knows. There's a theory that the hall is an ancient astronomical calibrator. The slabs could have served as a reference point for tracking solar cycles. But that would require a passage, not just something hidden in shadow. And why build a structure that can't be entered? Some believe the hall is a natural phenomenon, a remarkable combination of erosion and karst processes. But natural processes don't create a perfect oval of slabs. They don't carve out a perfectly flat area. And they certainly don't create a sound-absorbing effect. Attempts were made to cut the slab that seemed colder than the others, but the tools glided over the stone as if it were glass. No cut or crack appeared. The slab was too dense, too smooth, and too solid to be natural. The Mongolian Hall remains one of the region's quietest and simultaneously most disturbing secrets. It doesn't seem hostile, but there's something deeply unnatural about it, something that defies the usual rules. Standing in the center of the hall, in absolute silence, one senses only one thing. This place was made for something, but that for which it was created is long gone, or has not yet returned. Source of the tundra. Amid the icy wastes of the far north, where the ground is frozen almost year-round, there exists a place unlike any other. It's called simply Warm Spring. But the name is deceptive. It doesn't resemble ordinary thermal springs. It doesn't emit steam, isn't surrounded by a mineralized crust, and doesn't smell of sulfur. It's quiet, pure, and yet utterly impossible. The spring is located in a narrow depression between hills, where winter temperatures drop below 40 degrees below zero. But in a small circle of land about 5 meters in diameter, snow doesn't stick. It melts even on the coldest days. The soil there is moist and soft, as if it were a warm spring. And the water, collecting in the small depression, remains liquid, clear, and slightly warm to the touch. The first thing that surprises you is the lack of steam. Natural hot springs always have mist, warm vapors, and the smell of minerals in the cold air. Here, there's nothing. The water seems ordinary, unadulterated. It smells like pure ice. Its temperature is just above freezing. Not hot, but it never freezes either, even on long nights when everything around turns to glassy ice. The surrounding ground is also strange. It's soft, but not swampy. If you dig deeper, you immediately hit solid permafrost. This means the heat comes only from the thin top layer, literally a few centimeters. It's as if the heat is generated not deep down, but right at the surface. No known geothermal system works this way. Some researchers have suggested that there's an underground channel beneath the spring, carrying warm water. But the ice beneath the ground is so dense that breaking through it would require enormous forces. And even if the heat were to rise, it would melt the surrounding soil, not just the top layer. But the permafrost around the spring remains intact. The most astonishing thing is the temperature stability. It doesn't fluctuate. Sensors left in place for several months showed that the water and ground temperatures fluctuate by no more than half a degree, despite fluctuations in cold, wind, and night length. Such constancy is unusual for natural conditions where change is constant. There's also a biological mystery. A thin film of microscopic algae thrives within the spring. They survive there, even though their existence in such conditions seems impossible. Even stranger, a tiny moss grows around the spring, found nowhere else in the area. Biologists have found evidence of accelerated growth in it, as if the moss is living faster than it should. But they haven't found the cause of this acceleration. During one of their observations, researchers noticed an unusual noise. A faint, low hum, so quiet that it can only be heard at night, when the wind completely dies down. The sound emanates not from the water, but from the ground itself. It resembles a distant mechanical hum, steady, monotonous. But instruments don't detect the vibrations. The sound exists for the human ear, but not for technology. Several times, the spring has recorded an unusual phenomenon. The water glowed faintly at night. It wasn't bright. It was a soft bluish tint, like faint bioluminescence. However, water tests revealed no organisms capable of emitting light. And the strangest thing is, the glow only appears in winter, when the temperature drops below freezing. In summer, it's not observed at all. There are reports of a circle sometimes appearing for a second in the center of the spring. A perfectly smooth shape, as if something underwater rose to the surface and sank back down. But there's no pressure on the water, no bubbles, no ground movement, no ejecta. The circle appears and disappears, leaving no ripples. Some researchers believe the source may be linked to subsurface gas processes. Perhaps a layer of warmer air moves underground and rises to the surface through a narrow crack. But for this to occur, the crack would need to be consistently open, and the permafrost in these areas seals any cavities within weeks. However, the source has existed for centuries. There are even stranger accounts. One researcher was working alone near the spring. He reported hearing footsteps during the night, light as if someone was carefully walking on the ground nearby. But there was no one around. No footprints were found in the morning either. And yet, the sensation of someone walking around the spring has been reported by various people. On another expedition, 2 participants saw the air above the spring tremble for a second, like a slight ripple on a hot day. But it was winter, the frost was severe, and there shouldn't have been any heat haze. The ripple disappeared as quickly as it appeared. There are also legends. Locals say the spring is the eye of the earth, that the earth looks out through it. This sounds poetic, but the legends also have a theme. The spring refuses to be closed. People tried to cover it with stones. After a few days, the stones would collapse and the water would reappear. In one case, a fisherman even tried to freeze the water, but the ice only held at the edges. The center remained liquid. Scientists have tried to study the minerals in the water. It's almost perfectly pure, no impurities, no salts, no organic matter other than microscopic moss. Such pure water is almost never found in nature. Either it recently melted or it passes through filter layers. But there's nothing around to explain this. Some geophysicists believe the spring may be a unique window into a warmer subsurface layer unrelated to volcanic activity. But where is this layer then? And why does it only appear in one place? The mystery of the tundra spring is that it violates several rules of nature. Water doesn't freeze at temperatures where it should. Heat comes from the surface, not from deep within. The surrounding soil is stable and not subject to thermal changes. Sounds and lights appear at night that are unrelated to anything known. Standing next to a spring in the vast tundra, one feels not warmth, but a strange calm, as if the place lives by its own laws, as if the spring is not a coincidence, but a point where something emerges to the surface without directly announcing itself. And the longer they study it, the stronger the feeling that the source is more than just an anomaly. It's a boundary between the surface and what lies beneath, between frost and warmth, between the known and what remains hidden. Road Chile, high in the dry highlands of Chile, where rain falls only a few times a year, a strange phenomenon exists. A road that appears only after heavy rainfall. Not a path, not a vehicle track, but a perfectly smooth stone strip, resembling an ancient, hand-laid road. However, the next time it rains, it disappears, as if dissolving, leaving not the slightest trace. This road isn't marked on any map. It's invisible from satellites most of the time. It appears in the desert as a smooth, grayish line, almost a kilometer long. Its edges are straight, as if someone had carved them. The surface is smooth but not slippery. Stone, compact, as if artificially compacted. The first mention of the road dates back to a group of geologists who, after a rare rainstorm, spotted a strange strip dividing the desert into two parts. They assumed it was a riverbed formed by streams, but upon closer inspection, this proved impossible. A riverbed couldn't be as smooth as a slab. It couldn't be the same width throughout. And it certainly couldn't be solid, while the soil beneath the road was dense, almost rocky. A few days later, the road disappeared. In its place, only ordinary loose soil remained. Not a single stone, not a single slab, only sand and fine gravel. Geologists thought they'd made a mistake, but a few years later, after another rain, the road reappeared. In the same place, in the same shape, the same size. This sparked a surge of interest. New expeditions discovered that the road only manifests itself under a specific combination of moisture and temperature. Typically, a few hours after rain, the sun evaporates the moisture and the road begins to melt, first losing its definition, then its lines spread out, and it disappears. The soil beneath the road is what most surprises researchers. When the road exists, its surface consists of a dense, darkish rock layer a few millimeters thick. But when the road disappears, this layer is impossible to find. It seems to sink underground or turn to dust, but sand analysis shows no evidence of such a process. No mineral residue, no crystals, nothing. Some believe the road is a rare phenomenon caused by salt deposition after rain. However, salt forms a crust, not a dense, smooth stone surface, and certainly doesn't form straight edges. Others suggest the road is the result of soil properties, where water temporarily binds small minerals into a solid structure. But then the road should persist for more than a few hours and not disappear completely without a trace. The most mysterious thing is the repeating form. The road is always the same width, always perfectly oriented. It doesn't bend or change direction. It's as if there's a matrix or pattern beneath the ground that only reveals itself when exposed to moisture. There are other oddities, too. Several times, researchers have described a subtle, cracking sound that occurs when the road is forming. It lasts only a moment and sounds as if the stone is growing beneath one's feet. Microphones don't record this sound. It's either too weak or too specific. In one case, the group noticed a faint glow on the road surface. It was barely perceptible, bluish, and lasted for a few seconds. In the morning, neither the surface nor the soil samples found anything that could have caused the luminescence. No bacteria, no minerals. There's also an observation that's still controversial. Several people have claimed the road seems to lift when flooded, not visually, but by feel, as if the rock layer becomes denser, as if the water is shaping it. It's difficult to explain. Perhaps it's due to changes in pressure or soil density. But the mechanisms behind this process remain unclear. Some archaeologists have put forward a bold hypothesis that the road is part of an ancient structure long since sunk underground. Perhaps it was used for stone processing or cargo transportation. But this theory is undermined by the fact that the road disappears completely, leaving no traces beneath the surface. And beneath it lies only ordinary desert soil. There's also a mystical theory. Locals say the road is a path that reveals itself only when the earth so desires. Their legends say it's the path of spirits who supposedly walk the desert after the rains. It's a beautiful metaphor, of course. But the strange thing is that these legends existed long before the first expeditions. Several stories mention that while walking along the road, you can feel a strange vibration, a very slight one, as if something were moving underground. However, instruments don't register any ground movement, and this vibration disappears as soon as the road dries out. Some geophysicists speculate that a rare type of soil phase transition may occur beneath the surface, where moisture activates certain minerals, temporarily creating a solid structure. However, no analysis has revealed any specific minerals. Desert soil here is common. One of the researchers noticed an unusual property. When he stood on the road and listened, the sound of his own footsteps seemed quieter than on normal ground. It was as if the surface absorbed some of the vibrations. This is reminiscent of the properties of dense stone. But then again, after the road disappears, the soil becomes loose and the sound of his footsteps changes again. There are reports of even stranger phenomena. One night, after a rain, several people noticed the road glowing in a long, straight line along the horizon. It wasn't bright. It was more like it reflected the starlight more intensely than usual. But when they got closer, the light disappeared. The next morning, the road was gone. The Chilean road remains one of the most bizarre desert phenomena. It seems to live by its own laws. It appears where there are no roads or settlements. It appears clearly and then disappears, leaving no trace. Standing on this flat strip in the middle of an endless dry plain, a person understands only one thing. Sometimes the earth shows what is hidden in its memory, but only for seconds and only to those who have time to see it. Each of these 30 mysteries is disparate, unlike the others, living in its own landscape and obeying its own laws. But there is one subtle connection between them. None provides a direct answer. Stone forms, vanishing cities, sounds that go unrecorded, light visible only to the eyes, heat arising on the surface of ice, all of them remind us that the world is far more complex and profound than we are accustomed to thinking.